Kia ora, good morning and welcome along to this June edition of the Monitoring Ops Committee. Can I welcome councillors present here today, Toy Iti, Ken Shirley, Mati Moana McDonald, Stuart, Ron, Andrew and Malcolm, and online I have Te Taru and Councillor Thurston. Good morning, gentlemen. Can I remind councillors that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. Our purpose is to provide greater access to council debate, decision making, encouraging openness and transparency. I also remind all present that local government decision making affords no protection to councillors, council officers and public for the comments made during the meetings, and are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. Please ensure that you speak clearly to the overhead microphone when speaking, and for the benefit of the live stream, those members on Zoom, put your hand up when you, if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And on that, call for apologies, please. I have apologies from Chairman Leader, early departure at 8 AM. Chairman Leader is in the building, same with Councillor Millen. Councillor Thurston, you've got an early departure at 12 o'clock. Noted that. And sorry, Chairman Leader's leaving at 11 AM. Are there any other apologies that need to be noted? No, there's no. Would somebody like to move and second those apologies for early departure? Councillor Shirley, seconded by Councillor Von Dellison. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Public forum, there is none. Items not on the agenda, late items, there are none. We'll just take it as in the order of the proceedings. Order of the business is as per the agenda. Declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations? None. Thank you. Minutes of the Operations and Monitoring Committee meeting on 11th of March. Be taken as read. Is there any matters arising from the minutes from the March meeting? I have one written. Just on page 11. There was the resolution there. We request further information regarding advocacy for increased funding for QE National Trust and opportunities to increase funding for environmental programs through long-term plans. So that's been noted. So that'll come up in the next LTP in terms of funding streams to take it. Yes, note that. Yeah. So we don't have to do anything about that at the moment, but it's noted coming forward. Are there any other items on the minutes of the previous meeting? I note there we had the for the Rangataiki River scheme. We had the opening of stage 7. It was back in May. The new spillway on the Rangataiki River, and a number of us were there on that day. So that's good to see that piece of vital infrastructure completed and now operational. Are there any other items on the minutes, please? Not, would somebody like to move that the minutes be received? Councillor Crosby, seconded by Councillor Iti. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Right, moving on to our first presentation of the day. And I'd like to invite Josie Crawshaw to the presentation. Councillor Nees, you're online. Good morning. And Josie's going to introduce our first presentation this morning. This is presentation 7.1, Climatic Change Effects on Marine Habitats. And Josie, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Good morning, councillors. Yeah, thanks for the invite to come along and share some of the work that we've been doing today. So back in, just a little bit of background to this presentation and the report that we've had completed. Back in 2020, the council commissioned a regional risk assessment for climate change. And one of the findings of that was that marine ecosystems were very much at the forefront of climate change impacts coming from all different directions. And that that report was quite high level, and we felt that we really needed to delve a bit deeper into each of the different individual habitats in our region and look at what are the current risks, but more what are the opportunities for us to try and make them more resilient? How do we recover? How do we protect? And how do we move forward with making our region more resilient to the impacts of climate change? So we put that out for tender, and that has gone to SLR Consulting. So today we've got Kat Davis-Jones here with us to present the findings of that report. So over to Kat.
Good morning, Kat. And where are you calling from, Kat? Just so we can.
Kia ora, Morena.
Morning.
Tamaki Makoto I'm calling from. Sorry, I couldn't make it down.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Cool.
I believe your point in the floor's in your hands, Kat.
Share my screen. So is that, can everyone see that?
Perfect.
Perfect. Awesome. Morena, my name is Kat Davis-Jones, from SLR Consulting, and I'm a marine ecologist and coastal hazards specialist. And I've authored this report on climate change effects on marine habitats. So I thought I'd give a brief overview of the presentation today. So I've got sort of overview and purpose of the report, some context and background information, and that will go briefly into climate scenarios, the types of marine habitats, and the method for the risk assessment. And then kind of the cool stuff is the case studies. So that's the really interesting bit. So that's the climate change stresses and effects on various marine habitats. And then at the end, we've got sort of local case studies for increased resilience and adaptation. So as Josie said, the sort of the overview and purpose of this report was to summarise existing information and projects, and also use the published literature to look at climate change effects on marine habitats where there weren't local examples. So it's very much a summary report and didn't do any sort of like new research, but it's kind of the one-stop shop for a whole bunch of information sort of collated together into one report. And the idea behind this was to identify which marine habitats were at most risk to climate change, and then sort of provide an initial idea for restoration efforts in the region. So these are the various marine habitats that are covered in the report. So we've got, from the most landward, we've got salt marsh, mangroves, seagrass, shellfish beds. So two types of shellfish beds, sort of the kutai or the green lip mussel bed, as well as the cockle and hippie beds. We've also got dunes and beaches and chenier ridges. And then down into the deeper water, we've got kelp beds and sponge gardens. So the methods for this report, how we went about it was, there were two key reference documents. And as Josie mentioned, in 2022-23, there was a climate change risk assessment that was completed for the Bay of Plenty. And this was done by Tonkin and Taylor. And this kind of was very high level, and it looked at infrastructure as well as environmental effects, and also freshwater as well. And this was, this kind of was quite high level, but provided a lot of background information that we were able to use to apply to the various marine habitats. And then that report was based on MFE, the Ministry for Environment's a guide to local climate change risk assessments. And that way, that's sort of a guide for all regional and local councils to make sure that everyone is doing these risk assessments the same way. So it's kind of sets out quite a specified method. So those are the two key documents. And then there were some habitats that weren't properly covered in the TNT report. So what we did was we did a literature review on those, and we pulled together local research on marine habitats and looked at climate change effects on those. And then where there were gaps in that, we looked at sort of national and global research on that. So yeah, and then sort of like using grey literature, so stuff online, as well as published literature, so scientific papers and things like that. So I won't go too heavily into climate change scenarios because, it can get a bit dry. But basically, there are these different representative concentration pathways, and how those work is that they have different emissions from, I'll go into a little bit more detail in the next slide, but they have different emission scenarios. So there's the highest emission scenario, so that's the RSPC 8.5. And then there's the lowest one, which looks at sort of net negative, which is the 2.6. And then those are also looked at across different timeframes in this report. So we looked at it present day, the medium term, and the long term. And as you can see, as the time goes on, the difference between the two scenarios increases. So the quantum of effect is quite large as time goes on. And what those are sort of based on is guidance from the Ministry for the Environment and NIWA. And so the highest emission pathway is this 8.5. And this is based on sort of coal-fired power. Lots of the transports, mainly cars and trucks, and sort of increase. And there's very low efforts to curb emissions. And then we've also looked at a sort of medium-term scenario, and this looks at sort of a medium effort to curb emissions, and that takes into account renewable energies, a mix of different transport types, and then that ultimately affects the quantum or the scale of the effect that climate change will have. And the way that the guidance for MFE says to look at the worst case scenario for any sort of coastal adaptation planning. And the way that works is that you can have sort of a scenario planning or a adaptation planning pathway where if you plan for the worst case, if that doesn't eventuate into the future because there's a lot of uncertainties, it can be scaled back to these other sort of pathways. So, yeah. So the report, we've looked at the highest scenario, and we've also looked at the sort of medium range, these two ones. These are the various climate change stresses that we covered in the report. And so they've got the hazard. So this is sort of the various different hazards across the marine environment. So we looked at ocean acidification, marine heat waves, saltwater intrusion, those effects, and then what that does to the environment. So, for example, ocean acidification, that alters the pH, and then we looked at the effect. So if we looked at ocean acidification, the effect that has on various animals and habitat types would be life stage alteration, there'd be reproductive timing alterations, and other various effects. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but those are the ones that were covered in this report, and they were all included in the TNT risk assessment, except for changes to oceanic currents and tidal dynamics. So that one was one we covered in the literature review to look at the effects of that on the local marine habitats. So this is the results of the report. So this is the current effects. So I've kind of put this into sort of a table or graphic that looks at the effect being low all the way through to really extreme effects. So currently, salt marsh and mangroves are sort of low effects in terms of climate change currently. And then the moderate to high are these seagrass, shellfish beds, and dunes, beaches, and chenier ridges. All the way to extreme effects right now are kelp beds and sponge gardens. And as time goes on with a medium time frame, so that's the 2050, and under a high emissions scenario, we can see that mangroves don't really change. They're quite resilient, but some of the other habitat types sort of shift into the moderate high risk assessment results. And then, yeah, sponge gardens, kelp beds, still extreme results of the extreme effects seen under climate change. And then as time goes on, so this is the 100-year results. Mangroves are starting to show effects, and this is also high emissions. And some of the other sort of medium ones that were less affected under the shorter term timeframes are more affected now. So what does that look like? I've got some case studies here to show what those sort of effects would look like at a habitat level. So these are some of the case studies we looked at. So one of the effects is salt marsh, is coastal squeeze on salt marsh. And this is a threatened habitat type currently. So there's becoming less of those habitat types in the region. So what happens is that under a natural scenario, if the sea level was to rise, and this has happened lots of times in the past, sea level would rise and the coastal wetlands, including salt marsh, would naturally migrate landwards and sort of colonize freshwater habitats. But under sort of coastal squeeze or coastal narrowing scenarios under climate change, what happens is that there's something that will restrict the sort of landward movement of those habitats, and that's often to do with human intervention or anthropogenic intervention. So in the Bay of Plenty, that can include stop banks that prevents migration landward, and also can be natural effects, like if there's a steep cliff or something there, or topography that's affecting landward migration, or it could be land use related. So that could be, there could be rural land use, there could be pasture, and then that sort of reclaimed land that's been used for agriculture. It could also be urban development, so where there's cities and infrastructure and things like that. So with salt marsh, there's some resilience to climate change effects. They have ability to trap in sediments. And one of the other effects of climate change is that we're having more sediment that's applied to our coasts. So that with increasing sediment and also increasing sea level rise, there's some sort of balance that may occur in terms of those habitats being able to respond to both of those and sort of develop and expand into new areas. The effect of that, other factors that affect that, the rate of sea level rise. So if it happens really rapidly under one of those some more extreme climate scenarios, they might have less ability to sort of respond. And also vertical land movements. We do get the land is also moving as well as the sea level rising. So that will also affect that will also affect the ability of those habitats to respond to climate change effects. And there's also other anthropogenic pressures, other human pressures that will affect their ability to respond and be resilient to these effects. So one of the local studies that the Bay of Plenty Regional Council has undertaken is mapped salt marsh extent, and did this for the Bay of Plenty region in terms of the preferred elevation that salt marsh likes to inhabit in the region. And this was compared against different sea level rise scenarios. And the way that this is important is that it can show areas where it can sort of help. It can help identify areas where restoration efforts are going to be more beneficial in the long term. So if there was an area where you can see, like on Matakana Island there, that there's going to be large areas which are going to be inundated by salt water into the future, that might be areas where you might want to sort of prioritise or focus your restoration efforts. And then there might be other areas where, say down in Katikati here, where there's going to be various salt marsh wetlands currently, and the ability of those to migrate landward are going to be restricted by urban development. So you would know if you were focusing your restoration efforts in those areas that they might have a sort of medium or shorter term time frame to be before they were inundated by future sea level rise. So yeah, it's like a really cool project to help inform the medium to long term restoration projects for salt marsh. Another case study we did was looking at mangroves and coastal protection. And this is the importance of having a habitat sequence. So that's where you have a natural sequence of mangroves that sort of grade naturally into salt marsh and then grade hopefully into sort of native coastal forest. Often that's not the case. Often you have mangroves and then you would have sort of pasture or grasses. But yeah, the mangroves are really important because they protect the coast behind them as a sort of vegetation buffer from the various effects of coastal erosion. And they also trap sediments, which is really important because that means that they can they kind of act like a wetland in the sea, and so then they stop. If there's high sediment that's coming down from the coast, from the catchment, they sort of keep it in place and sort of lock up those sediments, which is also a way of responding to climate change because they're they're absorbing carbon when they do that. So yeah, they're pretty important, and they've shown that they reduce friction and reduce the amount of storm surge, and therefore reduce the erosion risk to the coastline. So another case study we looked at was coastal warming, and this is we've seen in the past 2 years we've seen an increase in coastal waters, the temperature of coastal waters, to about 2.5 degrees, and we've also seen some coastal heat waves as well. So what this has caused is, in the past, there's been like a lot of sea lettuce blooms, and more recently, this has been replaced by filamentous algae blooms. So this is the photo here with a seagrass bed and filamentous algae on top of it. And what that does is it smothers the seagrass bed, which is obviously a very important habitat for snapper, and it also absorbs carbon. It's a blue carbon habitat. And yeah, so basically it's really hard to remediate. So if you get this filamentous algae on top of the seagrass beds, it causes sort of anoxic or smelly sediments, and that sort of really strong sulfur reducing bacterial sort of smell, that stinky smell, and that becomes that is really long, takes a long time to recover. And it's really difficult to remediate unless you dig it out with machinery, and then ultimately you would destroy the seagrass bed underneath it. So the early research on this indicates that there's some sort of trigger from the temperature of the water. So where previously the temperature was warm, and that was sort of the ideal habitat range for the sea lettuce, and as the temperature increases, that's the sea lettuce isn't as adapted to live in those water temperatures, but the filamentous algae prefers that warmer temperature, and so that's why that one's taken over. So yeah, this is quite devastating and quite hard to remediate as an effect. The other coastal warming effect is sponge bleaching. So often you hear a lot about coral bleaching in sort of tropical areas. In New Zealand, we have sort of kelp beds that turn as the water gets deeper. It turns into sponge gardens, and sponge gardens are really important. They're a biogenic habitat, which means that they are a living habitat that provides the sort of baseline for a lot of other habitats other animals to live in. And yeah, as I mentioned before, there's this sort of increasing temperature and coastal warming, and what's happening is we're seeing around Motusi Island, this thesis that was done recently 2 years ago showed that the sponges were basically melting. And that, if you can see the arrow there, and also these white patches on the sponges, and this is happening under current temperature change increases. So yeah, it's quite devastating to see that the sponge is sort of disappearing. And what's also challenging is that there's very little known about the current extent of sponges in the country and across the world, but in New Zealand in particular and the Bay of Plenty, we don't really know about where they are and what their distribution is, and we might be losing them before we get to know that they're actually there, which is pretty scary. So these are going to focus on the good stuff, the positive. This is the actions for increased resilience and adaptation. So the report kind of covers various sort of aspects of this. So this talks about adaptation, adaptive management, so that's that pathway planning that I spoke about before, policy-based restoration, and I'll get into that in a little bit, but the main focus is these sort of nature-based solutions and restoration activities that are sort of can be conducted over at a local scale. And the idea behind this report, there's a big table in the back, and the idea behind this report was to sort of provide a overview or a collation of these different restoration activities, so that a hapu or a community group or any sort of development that was having an impact in a certain area could pick up this report and go, okay, we can use this restoration activity or trial this in this area, and kind of have that as an initial idea. I thought I'd just quickly look at policy-based restoration. So this is sort of at a really high level, government level, and there other places in the world have programs for blue carbon credits, and that's looking at funding where development has would like to offset their carbon. And currently at this stage we have various carbon offsetting programs, and those are mainly focused on terrestrial habitats. That's where you put funding into a pot, and then the particular area, the particular company will go and plant trees, for instance. So the idea behind blue carbon is that it funds various restoration projects in the marine environments. That would be salt marsh, planting mangroves, seagrass restoration. And the way that that's more beneficial in terms of adapting to climate change is that often these habitats store more carbon than terrestrial habitats, which is really cool. The other sort of policy-based restoration example that I've got here is sort of catchment management, and that looks at looking at the effects that catchment-wide and freshwater effects would have on the marine environment. So that's sort of like controlling sediment and discharges at a catchment level. So these are the various nature-based solutions that are currently underway in the Bay of Plenty. So there's a bunch of different ones here that sort of range from that sort of like right up at the top of the catchment, riparian planting and protection, and then kind of go into the more marine, seagrass monitoring, mussel restoration, kutai, reefs. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about some of these in more detail, including the mussel restoration and living seawalls. So there's been a really successful kutai restoration project where they have looked at recruitment of mussel spat onto spat lines in the harbour, and then they have different beds that they've managed to restore where the mussels used to be. And the key takeaway for this project for me, when I was reading about it, was that it was sort of really led by the local iwi and the local hapu, and they use the the elders' sort of knowledge of that area of where those historical reefs were, alongside the Western science looking at catchment effects and sedimentation. And that's been really successful in that's been really crucial in the success of these projects. And they've had, they've developed these restored beds all through the harbour, which is really exciting to see, because in the Hauraki Gulf and Tamaki, it's been really difficult to restore the beds there. And that's mainly sediment, but also there isn't this sort of ground grassroots startup sort of as well as Hapu-led project. So yeah, it's really awesome to see and really exciting. There's still some challenges with this project, including predation by starfish. But yeah, it's really promising and really exciting to see. So some of the ones for opportunities for the future, these are current projects that are across the motu, but not currently in sort of large numbers in the Bay of Plenty region. So I'd like to stress that these are sort of looking at restoring habitats, and these aren't necessarily going to directly combat climate change effects, but they are ways that that the region could sort of expand on these habitats and provide resilience. So in the Hauraki Gulf, they're doing kinna removal projects. So this is where they physically go in and remove the kinna, and that helps the kelp beds restore. At a policy level, the best thing for that would be reducing the number of fish that were being caught by commercial and recreational fishers. But at a local level, it's it's been very successful at restoring the beds in those areas. There's a project in Wellington called Project Rimurimu, and that has looking at growing kelp onshore and in sort of like farm environments, and then reseeding those out into the environment. And so they grow kelp on rocks, and then they put them out into the marine environment, and then they've been really successful at bringing kelp back into those areas where they were sort of lost or due to excess fishing. Some of the other emerging research is to do with artificial reefs, and this is mainly around development, where it's sort of like the work that I'm involved in, where there might be some sort of environmental effect that needs to be offset, including where there might be a habitat that's lost because of some sort of coastal development. And so emerging research is around these artificial reefs, including the Sea Nest, which is in Invercargill, and these artificial reefs in Wellington, and to do with the Te Aratapua project. And these have been really successful. These kind of act as fish aggregation devices and sort of artificial reefs. So you get colonization with algae to begin with, and then you get loads of fish and fish life coming back to what was natural, which was naturally a sort of soft sediment environment. Yeah, so that's really awesome to see. There are complications with those. They're made of concrete, which does have a carbon emission related to it, as well as it involves reclamation of the seabed, which is a environmental effect. One of the ones that's in Tauranga that's just been implemented is this living seawall. And this is where normally you would have sort of a rocky shoreline that was covered in sort of these big rocks, but they've got these living seawalls, which are these intertidal rock pools that provide a habitat for a range of intertidal species. And that's had some mixture of success. They're showing that they are colonized by animals. And sort of early stages there on that one, which is pretty cool to see. And then artificial bird habitats. So this one here is for Te Aratapua. This is a roosting habitat that they've created for various shorebird species. So that's been quite successful as well, and uptake by the local birds there. Oh, this is the kelp restoration. This is what I was just talking about before. I won't need to go into that in any more detail, except for other considerations for this is catchment sedimentation management. That's kelp is very sensitive to sediment. So if there is a lot of sediment in the environment, it needs to be managed as well as doing the kelp restoration, and then your site selection is pretty important for that. This is a better photo of those living seawalls and the early sort of colonization of these with algae and various little critters. The other considerations for these is that it is an engineered structure, so it requires ongoing monitoring to review the design and the success of it. And it also needs a high sort of standard of proof to begin with, because it needs to primarily protect the coast from coastal processes. And also requires a higher footprint in terms of the area that it covers compared to a traditional seawall. And so it would include some reclamation of the seabed as well. So there are different environmental effects to consider. So summary and conclusion. Sorry, I've gone over time. So kelp beds and sponge gardens are the most vulnerable to climate change risks. And then the ones that are sort of moderate risk are seagrass, soft sediment habitats, shellfish beds, and then your sort of dune environments. And salt marsh and mangroves are at the lowest risk and have more resilience to climate change effects. Many of the nature-based solutions are sort of at early stages of research and sort of have restoration trials that are underway. And what's really important, because it's at an early stage, is the monitoring of the outcomes and sharing the success and the failure of these projects. And that way we can kind of, the knowledge and information around those can kind of move forward, and we can implement them in different areas and know what the strengths and weaknesses are of those different restoration activities. So yeah, that's me. I'm happy to take some questions if there's time.
Thank you, Kat. Really interesting. Couple of questions from me first.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about mangroves.
Yep.
A lot of them here. And we often get groups of communities coming in and saying, can you do something about our mangroves? And we used to have a harvester, no, not a harvester. Was it hovercraft to destroy mangrove areas? So you're saying today, leave them alone.
Yeah, I'm very pro mangroves, but I do understand where there can be a balance for sure, and especially where access to the coast is important, and you need to clear mangroves to get sort of boats through, or there's sort of a visual impact as well. I understand that there is that, but in terms of climate change, they are 10 times more, 10 times better at absorbing carbon than terrestrial forests, and they also provide a habitat for a lot of native fish and various other marine animals, and they protect the coast from erosion. So they kind of are. Lots of places in the world are planting mangroves, and so it's really crazy that we have this sort of anti-mangrove thing in New Zealand.
Right, I will quote you when groups come to us and say,
just send them to me.
Yeah. And the blue carbon credits you talked about,
yes,
Kat, is that up and running? Because we're doing a major development on Waihi Estuary, where we're creating a wetland. We're taking dairy farmland, creating a wetland, and a lot of it's going to be to mitigate the degradation of the salt marshes and the what was the other one in Waihi Estuary? Yeah. So the Blue Carbon Credit Program is not operational yet.
No, but I think that the Nature Conservancy is they're looking at developing it, and I think that it's really established in other places in the world. But yeah, it could be a really amazing way to fund these restoration projects, and kind of be an opportunity for development to sort of pay back or offset their emissions. But yeah, it's still emerging. I think it would require probably some sort of national government level program, but I think it is in the works. So I think it's sort of a watch this space.
Is this Blue Carbon Waihi Estuary is your baby? Did you want to make a comment too?
Yeah. Look, we've been involved with Nature Conservancy and Blue Carbon, Terra Carbon are also sort of monitoring the carbon sequestration from planting of wetlands. As we speak, they're involved in the Waihi Estuary. So we're looking to get some, and we're hoping that we can establish, some really good, strong base information that can really, really enhance that carbon credit aspect of wetlands planting. And that's helpful for the farmers too, who have to surrender some of the land. And in surrendering some of the land, they may well be able to benefit from blue carbon opportunities as well. So I just wondering if you know much about the Waihi Estuary, because it's quite a major project. The elimination of seagrass, for example, and trying to bring that back. The nurturing of the pipi beds and mussel beds, some of them which have been quite toxic poisoning from farming activities. We're working on that. So it's quite a comprehensive program. Are you aware of it at all?
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, that was in the report. The pipi and cockle restoration, as well as the salt marsh. Really awesome.
Yeah, I think the blue carbon aspect is quite important as well, if we can prove it. That is, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think developing the science behind it would be is the first step, and then hopefully once that's been proven and well established, then there'll be buy-in from various different organisations. It'd be really great.
Well, it does offer the farmers as well the opportunity to retire some of the land in the margins and be able to get some benefit from that as part of it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Te Taru. And final question from me, Kat, is we're really proud of our Ohiwa Harbour restoration program under the auspices of Dr. Kura Paul Burke.
Yeah.
Go from pretty well zero mussel beds to significant restoration. It's taken a lot of work in terms of Mataranga Māori led. So we're really pleased to see what Dr. Kura Paul Burke has been able to do in that area as well. So acknowledging that and the restoration of Ohiwa Harbour. Are there any other questions, Councillor McMillan? I knew you were going to be asking a question. Councillor McMillan?
Apologies for my lateness, Chair.
No, go.
And thank you, Kat. Awesome. And I'm really excited about this space. And I think in the Bay of Plenty we are, in terms of our nature-based solutions and our trials, I think we do pretty well. And I think there's opportunity to really scale that up and establish some of these programs. I too am supportive of mangrove, and I do wonder whether we need to do a bit of mangrove advocacy work to create awareness around the benefits of mangroves, because they do get a bad rap. My question is around restoration aquaculture. It's not a big thing in Aotearoa, but I know, for example, last year I was in Tahiti and they had a whole restoration aquaculture commercial industry going on there. Where do you think there's, because obviously with Shane Jones and the government sort of drive to aquaculture, do you think there is opportunity for restoration aquaculture industry? In other words, growing kelp to plant out the kelp forest, all those sorts of things where you produce it in an artificial aquaculture environment to grow it to then restore and enhance nature-based solutions. Do you see that ramping up over
Yes, I do. And I think it's really important because otherwise we're just going to completely, like, in terms of the mussel restoration, we've seen in the Hauraki Gulf, as soon as that completely disappears, it's really hard to restore when there's nothing there. So I think there's sort of an interim or short-term solution to making sure our kelp beds don't disappear completely. And I think that would be that's where the restoration in terms of growing them on land and then planting them out into the marine environment would be really important. But alongside that, we need to have fisheries management that protects these reefs. Yeah, and we kind of can't do it without fisheries management and sort of marine protected areas, and sort of moving towards and sediment management, catchment management, all various environmental sort of policy as well alongside those. But yes, I think it's been really successful in other regions, in Wellington in particular. And I think it's in terms of offsetting, where there's been emerging research where they've got kelp farms sort of offshore, and then they sink the kelp down to the seabed, and they're using that as sort of as a carbon offset. That I think would be really hard to scale, like to get the right. The scale there is quite difficult, but that's also an emerging area that is being looked into. We've actually got a project with SLR that we're working with, looking at that sort of offshore, offshore blue carbon. But it is, it's really cool, and it's emerging area of research.
Thank you. I think there's so much potential opportunity as with this information in terms of where to next and the so what, that it potentially could sort of come from monitoring and ops into a strategy thinking space to strategy and policy, because I think there are so many opportunities here. And as you say, in the policy space, some of that central government policy, but there are local things that I think we can look at as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Two more questions for you, Kat, from Councillor Nees and Councillor Shirley. Councillor Nees, over to you. Can't hear you, Jane. Can't hear you, Jane. No, still can't hear you, Jane. I'll come to Councillor Shirley, Jane, while you sort out your comms. Councillor Shirley.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Kat. As a layman's observation, I've noticed that we don't seem to have the same algal blooms of the Ulva sea lettuce that there were a decade or so back in Tauranga Harbour. Is that your observation? Because generally sea lettuce is seen as a sort of an indicator of excessive nutrient and is not a good thing to have. But we used to have very big banks of Ulva sea lettuce washed up on various coastlines, particularly around Matua and other parts of the harbour. That's my layman's observation. Is there any scientific evidence to show that there is less sea lettuce around these days than previously?
Yes, Josie, do you want to talk about that? That's kind of one of your projects.
We completed a report probably 3 or 4 years ago now, but we've got some sentinel monitoring sites for sea lettuce that have been running since 1990 that Stephen Park set up, and very much so we're trending very low compared to what those historical blooms that there used to be. And we had an El Nino event a couple of years ago, and we expected to see a bit of a bloom kick up then, but we didn't. But that did time with when we had the marine heat waves running over summer, and that temperature in the harbour was just slightly above the threshold that sea lettuce can grow and thrive in. So part of what we've noticed is instead we're seeing filamentous algae blooms come into play. So still quite a bit of questioning there as to the drivers and the why and the what, but we do have some monitoring that we're setting up to help kind of address some of those questions.
So do you think climate is the driving factor, or is there a lower nutrient in the coastal waters?
it could be a combination. We definitely have some reducing nutrient trends from our rivers, but we do have some increasing trends. So we're working on our estuary water quality report for Tauranga Harbour at the moment, so we'll be able to answer that soon.
Councillor Nees, have you got your comms sorted? Okay. You want to, Amanda's just suggested you put it into chat if you want to, but I'll come back to, yeah. Are there any further questionings for Kat before we leave? No? If not?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's just that it seems that climate change is really accelerating. I see your timelines of 50 to 100 years, and some of the comments you made, but it seems like climate change is accelerating. Do you have any view on that, about the timeframes that are there? I'm just trying to think practically about what we do in the time that we've got left.
Yeah, it really depends on that. It's a bit scary seeing some of the things that are happening in other places in the world in terms of reversal of some of the sort of green energy, especially. But yeah, I think we keep on with our renewables. Like New Zealand is really high in terms of its renewables. In terms of acceleration, keep policies that encourage people to have transport options that are not resilient on on fuel, sort of petrol based and things like that. And then there are other ways as well in terms of on the ground, keep on doing the amazing restoration work that you're doing as well. But yeah, it is scary seeing the acceleration, and there are things that we can be doing in the interim and coming up with adaptation planning to sort of counter these effects. But yeah, I think some planning now is really important, to plan for the worst case scenario and have that pathway for the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jane, have you got?
Yes,
now?
I'm on my iPad. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, perfect.
Yes. Okay, thanks very much. While you were talking, Kat, I was reflecting that this process has occurred many times during our history on this earth, but it's much faster now. It's absolutely accelerated, and particularly when you're looking at some of the more extreme scenarios. Nature doesn't have the ability to evolve the way it has done in the past over millennia. So is there a place for us to help nature by finding species that can cope well for higher sea temperatures, and perhaps use those for restoration and reseeding? Or is that counter to the preference to have indigenous species that have always been here? Because I think if we aren't innovative, we may find that we're wasting money and fighting a losing battle, because we can't do our work fast enough and in a durable way to actually stop species being impacted in any event.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And you can have the same species, but you can just select individuals that are more resilient to, say, higher temperature. And Cawthron is actually doing a lot of research on that with kelp, and then they're also doing a lot of research on that with salmon, because I'm sure most people are aware that a lot of the salmon farms are really struggling in the Marlborough Sounds in terms of temperature, and their stock basically is dying. And yeah, that's a huge impact and sort of economic impact. And also, I love salmon, so I want to keep on eating New Zealand grown salmon. And so yeah, there's been some offshore farms that have been looked at in terms of areas where they're less affected by those warmer waters, but they're also, Cawthron is looking at selecting salmon that are have higher heat tolerance than other individuals, and breeding those. But yeah, obviously there are various indigenous values that need to be taken into account for that. And yeah, so I think working alongside the various hapu groups with that, and sort of using that Mōtauranga Māori perspective and lens would be really important when developing those. But it's definitely something that we need to think about. Thank you.
And final question, Kat, from Councillor Toyiti.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. This is less a question for Kat, and I guess more of a kōrero to us, following on from Te Taru and Jane. The arms race is on for AI, and all projections are showing that carbon emissions are going to shoot up because they're just so power hungry. And not to be doomsday-ish, but I guess the question for this organisation is, with limited resources, where do we deploy those resources in terms of restorations moving forward? Because there's going to be a really difficult questions for us to answer when we're making decisions around what can we save and what can't we save. Because for myself sitting here, I feel like we're sort of trying to stop a tsunami by doing this. And there is not much point deploying resources because it makes us feel good, when really the impact of whatever policy we put in place is not really going to have that much of an impact, really, considering the trajectory. So that's my question. What are the thresholds, and we ask our staff, that's the difficult thing. When do you stop doing something? Because it's so tough, and is it worth, it's like having an old car and you go, oh, well, you actually got to move it on, because if you keep spending money on it every time to get a new warrant, you're fighting a losing battle.
Probably not a question for Kat.
It's not, but it's after this presentation where it leaves me.
And I think the answer for me is we're going to leave mangroves alone, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, when groups come to us. They are what they are. Namuta, have you got a sort of you come online, can you answer that question for Toy in terms of overall where to from here?
I can try through the chair and councillors. So I think one piece of the puzzle is in marine spatial planning. And so you'll recall we're going into a space where we're looking at regional spatial plans shortly. We've got 3 sub-regional spatial plans. Well, the upcoming regional spatial plans have the coastal marine area as part of that remit. So there's a key opportunity there to look at the climate change impacts on marine habitats as part of that work. Certainly, we've been working with our colleagues on the current 3 sub-regional spatial plans and future development strategies to get into those implementation plans and action around mapping and getting ready for this new system. And certainly we can feed into that thinking, or perhaps developing a criteria around making sure we turn our minds and lenses to the climate change implications for marine habitats in that space too. So there's another opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you, Namuta. Kat, do we have a copy of your presentation? Amanda, is it online, or it'll be available online? You have it? Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kat. That's been really interesting for us in terms of what we do in our swim lane and future policy settings for us going forward. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your advice, and thank you for your research. It's been really interesting today. And on behalf of Bay of Plenty Regional Council, thank you very much for your presentation. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay, people, before morning tea, we're just going to do the chair's report, and this is on page 17. We've got a number of staff in the room this morning to answer any of your questions. Probably from me, Ruben, we've got Fraser and Stephen, Ella's present, Karen, Chris and Stephen, thank you, and Namuta's online, and Glenn's here as well. And Marion's online. Great, the team's here. And that. So, Chair's report. Question from me first, Ruben. we now are the owners of the Noble property in Caricat. Just in terms of a structure going forward, in terms of that land, Chris, you might be answering this question. We now own the land. What strategies have we in place in terms of going forward for that property and to use it as a template for other property purchases if we desire? So it's just a sort of a update from us for that Noble property, and then where to from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was sort of ready to give you an update on what we have been doing. I'm not sure about the structure. So.
Oh, okay. Well, tell us what you've been doing.
Okay, so Braden, Land Management Officer, and myself have been working with the property. We've got the fencing completed now and the track upgraded. That's the track that goes west to east. The grazing lease is in place now with the neighbours there, so that's all. We're still getting the stock water system underway, so that hasn't started yet. But the stock have access to water, so that's not an immediate problem, and that should be done by Christmas time. So there'll be some native plantings within the new fenced off areas with it over the next 3 winters, so that's not a rush to get that done. And of course, we've written to the Pistol Club and the Owners Club advising them they need to exit the property in the next 3 years. So I think that was 6 months ago, so 2.5 years now. And we've heard back, I think, from the bow hunters saying they've actually found a new location already, so they should be fine. Pistol Club not so sure yet. And we've offered to help them with the relocation as well. We've also just more recently, Braden and I have met with the leaders of the Ngai Tamawhāora Hapu who live nearby, so the mana whenua of that area. And they've agreed to work with us on the naming of the property as well. So that was a very positive meeting. In terms of future structure, I'm not sure what that means other than we aren't intending to open it to the public until the clubs have left for safety reasons. And even then, you know, it would be pending funding in the LTP to open it in a way that is reaching the standards that the Papua Falls Regional Park and have reached. So we need to have a think about that, and a future council will have to discuss how we fund that. But yeah, I think we've got the relationships in place with Ngai Tamawhāora District Council, local care groups who might want to be involved in hunting and restoration work and designing what a park might look like. So that wouldn't probably a management plan for the park. I mean, it's already covenanted and that sort of thing, so we've got protection layers in place. But I don't think we'd started drafting a management plan until we get the Pistol Club into a new location.
So there's a dedicated staff member now whose job description includes that property. That's what I'm after.
Yeah, Braden's been working
Sorry.
himself on it, and his team leader Courtney Bell as well.
Yep.
But he's not just dedicated to this. He does.
No. I'm just making sure somebody's got their eyes over it. And
cool. And we're providing regular reports back to the previous owner as well, Ian Noble and his family, because they retain an interest and they will have some input into the management plan, I suspect, as well.
Councillor Nees, did you want to ask a question on the Noble property? No. Okay.
Jim.
Councillor Shirley.
My recall is that Ian Noble had quite a clear view that there was no need to exit the Pistol Club or the Bow Club. Have we sort of made that a condition, and are they going willingly, or is it because of our insistence?
Not sure about willingly, but it has been insisted, and I know it was discussed with Ian and he had different views at different times, but in the end our MOU with the family does say that, that club does need to leave.
Are we sure of our reasoning for that though?
Yes, it's pretty certain you can't have a Pistol Club in a regional park in the same location. It's just not going to work from a safety point of view.
Any more questions on the, just in terms of an update? Thank you, Chris. That was really useful in terms of where we're from here.
Mr.
Moving
Chair.
on to the chair's. Oh, sorry, Te Taru. Yep.
Look, are we still on the chairman's report, are we?
Yeah. Is it to do with the Noble property?
No, it's not. No, it's
working.
not. No, carry on.
Okay, thank you. So another issue from me, Ruben, is some time ago, this committee wrote, or council wrote to NZTA, concerned about the weed problem on state highways, aka woolly nightshade, privet, gorse, you name it, on road reserves. We did write to them. I know there's been a CEO, new CEO since. Have we had a response from NZTA, and do we need to write to them again in terms of their responsibility to our weed pest management strategy in terms of owners' responsibility for getting rid of pests and weeds on road reserve? I'm tired of seeing woolly nightshade on road reserve. Well, Councillor Von Donaldson could go on about it, but we had a response from NZTA in response to our letter, and do we need to go back to them again?
I can't give you a good news response on this one. We haven't had the sort of response we might have been hoping for, but Greg Corbyn and I were speaking about this just last week and trying to strategise a way. As you've pointed out, there's been a bit of a change in the guard in that organisation, so we don't want to we want to make an approach that's successful, let's put it that way. So Greg and I are working on that. So hopefully by the next meeting we can give you all, even before that, a more positive response, but I can't give you a.
Okay, that's all right. We've put it back on the radar again, Chris, because I'm adamant that they have a responsibility as a landowner to do what they have to do as part of our regional pest management strategy and compliance. Yes. Any further? The leader.
Mr. Chair, with your leave, because I've got to go.
I know.
Similar vein, got to give you a task that it's been raised at UNISA that there's a developing biosecurity pest plant issue developed in Northland. And it's a very aggressive form of ragwort that's impervious to current rolls of spray. I just noticed the other day, the commentary from MPI was, well, it's a regional council problem. So could you ensure that you get an update from either biosecurity, land management people of what the implications of this could be? And then the secondary one is, it's one of these issues that I think the regional sector need to have a discussion about. Where do some of these functions best sit? If you're talking about a whole lot of incursions recently, they've all been picked up by MPI. And why on this particular one, they want to shed it home to regional councils, I don't know.
So is this ragwort resistant to the mite that they're using to control the seed head, or is it?
No, it's a new variant, a new breed.
Oh.
Ragwort. It's really invasive in Northland, and they're forecasting it's just starting to take hold in the Waikato, so we'll be next.
Okay, thank you for that. So the report, Chair's report, is open for discussion. I mean, there's some good stuff there in terms of regulatory compliance update. We've got some good chart there on page 18. Dairy compliance update, Ella, in terms of the number of dairy sheds inspected, and we're down to 6 that pose significant risk. Waitanui Water Users Group, the boat harbour is now, how shall I put that? Dead in the water. Ruben, in terms of our costs for the boat harbour, we've spent about 50K on soil sampling. Is that all we've spent in terms of cost? Excluding staff time. Fraser, you might like to comment on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, good morning, councillors. I had a look through what has been cost recovered and what hasn't. There was about $36,000 that was recovered, which was compliance charges, external consultants, and planners' time. There was $10,000 that was unable to be recovered under the previous fast track bill. The EPA can cost recover it, but us as regulators can't for free stuff. There's about $5,500 outstanding, which relate to the proposed landfill sites, but that's been invoiced and we expect to receive that. Yeah, the testing. There was reasonable amounts of time for staff, Ruben, myself, Ella, and other staff that was not cost recovered. It was just internal time against the project.
So the question is, they had to pay a bond, a significant bond?
So there was $585,000 bond taken for stage one. That's still held by Regional Council. I anticipate that will go back sometime after August when the interest matures. I also expect that the consent may be transferred rather than surrendered, but that's out of our.
Consent may be transferred.
So consent that exists under Te Rahui Hiringa Waka, that entity is going to be dissolved.
Right.
My understanding is that will be dissolved and there will be an opportunity for the consent holder to transfer that consent as like any other consent. What happens with it and when, we won't know, but I would be comfortable to repay the bond, and that if stage one of that project was, or the consent were to be activated again, we would revisit that bond condition. It still prevents any work from commencing.
Oh, okay.
The bond, so
Right.
we'll be protected there.
Did we not take some of our costs from that bond? Or is it?
The conditions in the consent for the use of the bond are very specific about remediation.
Testing? Testing?
It has been, that conversation was had in quite detail before the board.
Okay. Reports open for questioning. I've got Councillor Von Daddleston and then McMillan, Scott. Oh, I'll go around the whole room. And these. Councillor Von Daddleston, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Resource consenting update.
Page you on?
Well, I'm on page, I'm generalising at 22 at the moment. What my concern is that, and I've heard it from quite a few councillors, is what number of consents are going to hearings and why, despite several pleas to and a lot of training being done by councillors on getting their qualifications, we don't seem to use our internal councillors to do any of our hearings, and I think that's a mistake. In that we're close to our communities, and that's what you need. Actually, you need to understand the issues, and you bring someone in from Auckland and they don't have that personal understanding. That this has been raised both with staff and with the CEO by several councillors, and I just would like to get an indication of what the strategy is, because we should be able to do in-house a lot cheaper than using outside consultants. That said, there's a bit more work for staff probably in helping write up the decisions and that, but some of our councillors actually do that as well. So I just want to see if I can get from Ruben a bit of a picture and a reasoning.
Ella, do you want to, Ruben or Ella?
I'll go first and then Ella can fill in the gaps, if that's okay with you,
cool.
Mr. Chairman. We got some best practice advice in terms of elected members being on consent hearings a few years ago. We used to have, as you'll remember, a hearings committee. The best practice advice said it's good to separate out governance in terms of setting policies and plan requirements from the consent decisions, and that it was best practice to have independent decision makers come in to make those decisions. So we reported that back to this council and have been following that approach. That's why we are where we are at the moment. I think it's another debate that's constantly worth having, who sits around those tables. Ella might be able to fill in the numbers, but it's a fairly small percentage in terms of the number of consents that actually do go to a hearing, particularly the ones that are just us. my observation more recently is that we're often having joint hearings with the territorial authorities. And so we're collectively appointing panels in that situation. Do you want to add anything?
I think you've covered it all. I would say that, yeah, there are very few consent applications as a percentage that go to a hearing. But the ones that do go to a hearing are the ones that are generally at a much higher risk of appeal. So we're needing to utilise people with more expertise in planning law and planning practice in order to make sure that our decisions stand up to that sort of scrutiny.
Okay, come on this side. Councillor Scott, your question, and I'm going to go around the room, those online, and then I'll come back to you online later on, Jane and Titaru. So Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I just have a question about the map on page 21, which shows calls from the pollution hotline.
Yep.
I noticed that there are a lot of blue bubbles around Tauranga and around Rotorua, and I'm hoping that they aren't to do with the quality of the airsheds there. We've got some information what's driving those.
Morning, councillors, and through the chair. Yeah, I looked into that, especially around the Rotorua area, because obviously we've got an airshed there. There was 112 calls to the hotline for this period of the report. 39 of those were for air. While I drilled down, there were 98% of those were open burning. It's people just getting rid of.
Sorry?
Open burning.
Open burning, yeah. Most of them, like 98% were open burning. There's a couple of dust complaints and a couple of odours. One of those was jet fuel from near the airports. So I can reassure the council that they weren't regarding the airshed as far as indoor burning or people keeping warm using solid fuel burners. It was just backyard burning.
Would those have been, those open area burning, would that have been picked up if we were measuring particulates in the air?
Certainly, if someone was to light a fire right next to one of our monitors, it could cause an accident. But we've got to remember it's a 24-hour monitoring period, so it'd be quite short duration, you'd hope.
Thanks.
Councillor
no, not for me. Very comprehensive report. Thank you.
Councillor McDonald, did you?
I just have a couple, and probably my best one is to Ruben on page 22, and it's a reference to the discharge consent. And the appeal has been lodged by Ngāti Kuku. Can you just elaborate on what that is?
So the Lotters is one of the factories that's quite close to Whareroa. They went through a consent process to renew their ability to discharge the air from that plant. There was quite a bit of debate in the hearing and in the decision about the appropriate limits and then the timeframes that Lotter would have to be able to achieve those limits. So the outcome is really significant reductions in the key contaminants coming out of that plant. I think they had a period of 30 months to achieve those, and then the new limits will apply. So that decision doesn't align with the aspiration of Ngāti Kuku for managed retreat of industry from around that area. And so I think no matter what those limits were, it wasn't going to align. And so that's the basis of the appeal.
So how does that also align with the discussions that are occurring in the Mount Maunganui air quality group?
So the Lotters is one of the emitters into the Mount Maunganui airshed. So we have the new policy around improvement and through Plan Change 13, and that was one of the key considerations through that process. And again, that the air quality issue doesn't address the managed retreat aspirations.
Although I wasn't moving to the ministry, I just wanted to know then how is that information incorporated around discussions that are happening in the Mount air quality space?
I can answer that quite quick. No, myself and Councillor McMillan, Councillor Scott attended. There is a degree of frustration with some people, residents, that they perceive the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is wrong strong enough in terms of the, participating in those hearings with advice and or recommendations. But on the other hand, we have to council obviously align ourselves to the legislation limits, etc. So there is a degree of frustration, but it's a learning exercise as well. And I have to say the new chair, Paul Cooney, is doing a superb job with his legal background, his knowledge of many of those consents, is working the whole committee through all those issues. But no, there is a frustration. But at the end of the day, it's a process we have to legally go through, and we do it professionally. And what comes with that?
I think it's fair,
Yeah.
Chair Leader, ask your question. I know you have to go soon, so.
Thanks, Chair. Waitahanui Users Group.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of complimentary comments there. Can I just compliment staff on all the feedback I get from the users? They are really appreciative of the manner in which that was put together, how it's working, and can I suggest to staff that in terms of other multiple water take groups, that you try and facilitate a similar arrangement. Tongakawa catchment is a one, because that one that you put together is really good.
And also, Chair, while you're there, the Bay of Plenty Catchment Collective Workshop that you attended in Te Puke, did you want to make some comments about that? I believe there's some good outcomes out of that as well, because you were speaking there.
Yeah, well, as you know, I've had that discussion with you, and I think that the elephant in the room still is the issue around funding. So you've got MPI, you've now got MFE. No, sorry, you haven't had contact, but MPI, MFE is back in the frame in terms of some funding, and a regional council. Someone's just got to pull it all together so the catchment people, you know, farmers on the ground, dealing with essentially one agency to coordinate all this. Have multiple agencies in the room all offering different things is just not going to cut the mustard. I think it's a good initiative. It's still got some way to go, I think.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, thank you for representing us at that workshop in Te Puke. So I'll come back to questioning. Julie, did you have a question? No? Councillor McMillan?
Mine was on that really, on the Catchment Collective Workshop and the MPI funding. I just wondered if there's any update on that post-budget, and whether since this report there's any more shaping up of exactly what Chair Leader was talking about. You know, who's it going to sit with, who's going to administer it, how is it equitable, what does it look like, and do we have any more insights into that?
Yeah, good question about budget funding. Chris, did you want to answer that? New streams, revenue streams?
Short answer, no. MPI, I followed up several times actually with the local MPI person, and they don't seem to have a clear picture yet of any funding. I know that the ministers have made an announcement, I think it was a week or so ago, include any money for Bay of Plenty care groups or catchment groups. So several others around New Zealand, but not Bay of Plenty. So whether that means there is no more money left or not, I have yet to have confirmation of that. But I was interested to hear Chair Leader's comment about MFE potentially having some funding now as well. So I'll be making contact for them to make sure that coordination does happen, because that was the purpose of the 7th of May hui, that Namuta was there as well. And I think it was quite successful, and the agencies need to work together so that we're all, you know, singing the same song. So farmers and catchment groups are not with different agencies. So
just a supplementary, if I may, do you think this really aligns with Simon Upton's report with because I'm trying to remember what it's called now, but it was a land use change and the mosaic and the catchment focus, and that really came out in his report. And do you think MFE and MPI are listening to that research and advice, and actually there is a bigger shift towards this, okay, if we want environmental outcomes, we need land use change, we need the mosaicing, we need catchments working together. And so we're actually now going to enable that. Do you think that's actually coming together?
I'm not sure I've read the parliamentary commissioner report you're talking about, but I know that the regional council has developed its own, and I'm trying to remember the title of it, but it's an underlying land use risks framework. So, and that was one of the displays that we had on the day for farmers or landowners to look at. They can zoom in on their property and find out where your critical flow paths, for example, it might be that would be an area to avoid locating certain activities on, because that's where your phosphate tends to run down into streams. So yeah, we've got much better knowledge. Every year there are more science information is brought to bear on these problems of land use. So I don't think there's a silver bullet yet, but certainly our technical people are across all of this knowledge and trying to make it user friendly on the farm for people who are poor, but want to do the right thing. We've had those individuals presenting here at this committee in the past. We're just trying to work hand in hand on a non-regulatory basis while my colleagues are working in the regulatory sense.
Yeah. I'll flick you that report, but it's the one where it splits it up into all the layers, and he's basically saying, property rights. You have your geographical boundary of your land, but the environment doesn't work like that. So the only way we can solve this is by having this catchment mosaic working together thing, because obviously that's the way the environment works. So yeah, I'll flick it to you anyway. You'll probably know it when you see it. It was actually last year's, but he's talked about it a lot more recently.
Thank you, Kate. Those online, Councillor Nees and then Councillor White. Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I have 3 questions and two requests, if that's possible. Firstly, I'd like to endorse Chairman Leader's comments about the water user groups and that they seem to be working well. A question of the staff is, to what extent are we promoting this as we're starting to work with our pre-RMA consents coming through? Are we actually being a bit more strategic, and instead of just picking up each consent as they come, going back out and saying this is an opportunity that could really work well for you? Consider joining together with your neighbours to develop a water user group. So that's question number 1.
Yep, hold on. Yep. Who's going to answer that? Ella, it looks as though you're in the hot seat today.
We're not actively promoting it as such. That Waikahanui water user group, we very much actively promoted it because there was an allocation issue where it was over allocated, and we had a number of consents expiring at a similar time. So it lent itself really well to a water user group. They can be a bit complex in terms of administration and conditions and all of that. So I wouldn't sort of wholesale recommend it to every user. We'd certainly be sort of picking and choosing where we can see that it will work well. They're certainly not required for groundwater takes and wouldn't provide a benefit for those, but on streams where we do have a number of consents all occurring at a same time, then absolutely there's potential value in it, and we have been sort of just looking quietly at where that might apply, but it's definitely not wholesale recommending it to everyone, because there's quite a lot of legal costs for them in setting it up, and it's actually relatively complex in terms of the consenting and the compliance around it. So yeah.
Well, thank you for putting that.
Jane, just before you ask your second question, Ella, on bottom of page 22, you've made the comment, we continued to receive and process replacement applications for pre-RMA water take consents, which are due to expire 26. These are 600 or so So are you granting consent to those users based on old rules at the moment?
Our current rules,
Yeah.
yes.
You are?
Yes.
Oh, okay, right. That's a fine, yeah, that's fine, because we were sort of waiting for the Crown to bring in new rules so that we could do what we had to do, but they've just delayed, pressed the pause button. So you are granting consents?
Yes, we definitely don't have any grounds to just wholesale put them on hold for the government to do RM reform, which is going to take time. We do think there's great benefit to applicants and consent holders in having those processed efficiently. We're gearing up for more being batched to make it more efficient.
You remember, Mr. Chairman, that freshwater planning conversations, you had conversations around the new science. Sitting behind the allocation frameworks. And it's good to say, I think that science hasn't been wasted. It is being used by Ella and the consent team in those decisions that they're making at the moment.
Okay, cool. Jane, second question.
Thank you. On page 22, there's a comment about the Tahiki 8C fast track consent.
Yeah,
for
I think Te Taru's going to ask a question about that, but
yeah.
go on.
Well, possibly it's the same question. The Te Mara o Kaituna meeting last week was cancelled because the chair wasn't available. And at the previous one, there was quite a bit of concern that there hadn't been adequate consultation of iwi. And I'm really concerned that the co-governance entity does have an opportunity to input its views in that fast track consent. So do we know what sort of engagement with iwi the proposers of that consent have undertaken?
Yeah, Jane, if I can answer that from person on the ground.
Yep. Yeah, go.
Who, me? Okay. From the person on the ground, the consultation is minimal right now. The application for fast track happened well ahead of necessary consultation. So the answer to your question, really, Jane, is very small amount of consultation. And I've been told a number of times, several times now, at a couple of meetings that I've been at, where it's been a very restrictive group, that you need to get out there and consult. Full stop. It hasn't really.
So just to answer, Ella, in terms of fast tracking, yes, council's involved in terms of the process. Is Te Maru o Kaituna involved in that fast tracking process as well? Will they be consulted as they should be?
The Act requires that they're consulted prior to an application for referral or for a substantive application for a listed application. So that should have already happened. There's places in the Act in terms of if it was to be accepted as a fast track application, then there would be an invite for comment. In terms of the requirement to consult, that requirement really applies at certain places in the process, which if the application is now accepted for fast track, that requirement, I understand, is then fulfilled, and so, or deemed to be fulfilled. And so consultation thereafter would be at the applicant's own sort of discretion, but you'd think that they would need to do so in order to meet the information requirements for the substantive application. But yeah, so it's unclear where it sits right now in the process. We haven't had confirmation from the ministry or the EPA in terms of where it is in that process, if anywhere. Yeah.
So if I can,
Councillor, good question.
Yes, no, if I can just make a comment about that one, we will be asked for our comments. We are a partner to that co-governance entity, and I think we need to make it very clear that consultation hasn't been adequate and that the administering entity for that fast track consent needs to require that there be adequate consultation with not only just individual iwi, but also the co-governance entity. So just my suggestion. My third question is around the air quality exceedances at Ranch Road in Mount Maunganui. Now, it appears that they have all been driven by natural conditions, storm conditions. But have we got anything in place in case we do get one that isn't disallowed because of natural causes? Would that require us to then go through a process to extend that airshed boundary? And what have we done any thinking about what the implications would be about that if that boundary gets moved right across into residential areas?
Stephen?
Just clarify, you're asking about the Ranch Road monitoring, whether we'd have to extend the boundary if we got an exceedance there.
Yeah.
So that in itself is in its own airshed, which is the region-wide one. So with the current airshed being an industrial one, my understanding is that there's a kind of a hard boundary around the industrial area. Whether we would extend that to the Karen, more of a planning question than it is a compliance one.
Good morning. I was just thinking about it myself. I don't know that we would need to expand it. The effects are the same whether it's inside the airshed or not. But it would definitely be something we can consider, keeping in mind that once you extend an airshed boundary, whatever's within that starts to become affected by rules, and that could include domestic burners, although they're not a significant source in this particular area. So I think it's to be careful what we wish for in this particular case. I'm confident that it's okay where it is right now, but we'll take another look at it if there is a breach that does prove to be PM10, industrial based or even wood burner based.
Yeah, I mean, my thinking is that we need to be thinking about this because if it's in the wider regional airspace, an exceedance within it would pull in the rest of the region so, as a airshed. So we need to be thinking about some way of handling that if for some reason something occurs, which means it's got an exceedance, in which case we're forced to act.
Makes sense, Councillor.
Could I just add, we still have our activity in place that where we monitor the alarms and we can see the dust levels rising, and we do send the team out when we see that and investigate. So we have a slight kind of buffer with time when if we do see those levels rise, we'll get out there and try and find the source.
Great, thank you. Okay, so for my two requests, it's a fabulous report and there's some two very good pieces that I think would be of benefit to be taken to the Bay of Plenty Advisory Group meeting tomorrow night, which unfortunately I can't attend. So the first one is that drought report and the example of those maps. I think they would be very interested to see those. And secondly, that one page on the dairy effluent monitoring report would also be of interest, I think, to the people around that table. So I don't know, Councillor Shirley, if you wanted to perhaps pick that up. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Shirley's going.
Yeah, thank you. And then my last request is I've been copied into various complaints with regard to our monitoring or to our granting of consent, where there's been threats made that they were going to take the complaint further than just within our organisation because people have not been happy with our response. I do believe if, and one of them, as an example, it was to go to the Ombudsman, but also to the Companies Office. So I just think that it's quite important that we as a governance group are aware if anything like that is elevated to a higher power. And I'm just asking that that be considered as just a small addition to your report, Mr. Chair, just to make the council aware of anything that has been Yeah, where people aren't giving up and they're trying to take it further. So that's it for me. Thank you.
We've had previous reports in previous ops and monitoring reports, Jane, of other incidents that have gone to the ombudsman, and yes, aware of your concerns, and yes, we will be made aware of anything that goes further afield that can't be dealt with in-house. So I've got a few more questions around the table. Councillor Bondelson and then Shirley. Councillor Bondelson.
So just going back to Tahiki 8C, I remember I was on the hearing for Plan Change 6, the Kaituna River bringing it into the treaty settlement process, and Tahiki 8C submitted that they are ahi ka, and as such they're not iwi or hapu, they're ahi ka, and so they don't need to consult. That's what they told. So maybe it might need staff, somebody to talk to them, but they were very adamant in their submission in that hearing.
Yeah.
That was their basis, and that's probably why they're not going wider. They say they are.
I think Titaru shook his head vigorously.
That might be so, but it's not. I'm just giving you what they
understand.
Told us.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Councillor Shirley.
Yes, specifically the Pongakawa Water Users Group. I've met with the committee a couple of times, and they are not very happy with the regional council, I would say. So I'm just wondering where their water rights are in the process, because they're very keen to actually manage it themselves. They've been doing it for a number of years. They have a very effective committee. They've got a significant outer stream storage facility. All of their takes in that group are monitored, are metered with water meters. And I heard the comment that the administration can be an issue, but they are quite capable, I believe, and willing to actually manage it themselves. Their main dispute, I think, is the low flow of the Pongakawa, because as we know, it's actually fed through the ground from Rotomā and Rotoehu seepage with springs in the upper Pongakawa Valley. And they dispute the gaugings that have been taken at the Old Coach Road culvert, where the council's had some trouble with its gauging there, I understand. And they feel that the base flow at times of water shortage is actually much higher than the regional council has stated. So I'm just wondering, where are the arrangements or negotiations with that particular water management group?
Their consents, I think, being processed currently. So if they disagree with how we've got to a low flow number, they need to provide us with evidence as to why. I think it's an alternative.
I think the significance is that there's 2,500 hectares earmarked for kiwi gold in that vicinity. It's a really fast growing kiwi gold area, and that will certainly possibly put more pressure on it and more participants in that management group, I would expect.
I think through you, Mr. Chair, that so the current framework that Ella talked about briefly earlier on sets a default allocation for surface water, and the plan has provisions for people who want to look at alternatives to calculate a mean and low flow. And so that process is pretty clear in terms of doing research. If they are wanting to challenge the gaugings that lead to that default process, and of course, people in our team will be having that conversation with applicants or potential applicants all the time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions on Titaru? Did you want a question? You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, I got it. Oh, sorry. Look, just for a couple of questions, a couple of quick issues. Firstly, on the Tahiki 8C, I make no judgment for or against the proposal, other than the consultation is really, really important. Now, you talk about Ahika, okay, I'm not going to dispute the Ahika over their portion of the Kaituna, but when you carry on, it's a long river that goes down to the coast. Tapuika actually have a treaty claim, and the reason why the Marae Kaituna is formed is around that partnership between councils and Tapuika and the iwi. other iwi that's involved as well. So it's a treaty issue. And so therefore, it's really, really paramount that the consultation process is correct and right. And I know that Tapuika at the moment aren't happy. So that's the first point. Now, on the second point that I wanted to raise about the report, the chair's report. Firstly, well done, staff. I mean, we're doing a whole myriad of things and doing it really, really well. But I want to get back to what Toi actually says, that we are doing these things very well, but how prepared are we for changes in timelines? And I would say changes in timelines relative to climate change, which some might argue is accelerating. And every time I look out the damn window, I don't recognize some of these things that happened in the past. So I'm just saying that I think that what Toi has mentioned about being prepared, that it might be useful for us to have some conversation at some point around that. This is what we're doing really in the future of time over the next whatever number of years. Are we focusing ourselves well and prepared for the inevitable sort of dynamics that might happen around potential acceleration of climate change and other things for that matter? So I'll just rest that on the table, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry to be a little bit.
Your concerns have been noted, Te Taru, and thank you for that. Okay, there's been no further questioning on the chair's report. Thank you, staff. Thank you to all our presenters, Karen, Fraser, Ella, Stephen, Glenn, and I think Marion was online. Marion, good news about Rotorua. We're finally we're no longer polluted airshed after 15 years work. And I think Karen's gone out of the room, but Karen and I were right there at the start of the designation of the polluted airshed 15 years ago. So huge achievement for Rotorua. There's a resolution that we just move the chair's report to received. Item on to be removed. Councillor Ron Danielson second. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. We adjourn for morning tea and we'll be back here at 11:30. 11:30. Thank you and welcome back. Just before we go to people and capability report, I just wanted to get Namuta to give us an update on the regional pest management strategy in terms of ongoing issues there. Namuta, can you come back to us, please?
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me, Chairman.
Yeah, good. Perfect.
Kia ora, councillors. So just a quick update on the Regional Pest Management Plan. You'll recall through the period of last year, we reviewed the plan to look at making changes to include all wallabies, all conifer species, to ensure that exotic Kalupa and Corbicula were included as an exclusion pest, and that to ensure that the turtles were included as a sustained controlled pest. Good news, just to let you know, as the appeal period closed yesterday and we have received no appeals, which is fantastic. We'll give it a few days just to see if we have any appeals come in through hard copy mail. We don't anticipate getting any appeals. So if we haven't heard anything by the end of this week, as per your delegated authority at your meeting on the 27th of March, we'll ask Fiona as the CE to affix the seal and to make or deem those provisions operative.
Perfect. Perfect. That's how I like to do democracy.
Like a dictator.
Any questions to Namuta on that? That's good news. Well, it's good news and bad news. I mean, it means we're doing our job in terms of getting different species on board, and the people are behind us, if that's what that means.
Well, have we got a communication plan for that? What's operative, Namuta?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll make sure that we get relevant comms out through our normal channels to ensure that people are aware that those provisions will be made or deemed operative.
And when's go live date, Namuta? Is that Friday when Fiona signs it?
Yep. So as soon as the seal is affixed, it's I think the language in the Biosecurity Act is the plan is made. So will be those changes and those new provisions will be operative from then.
Right. Perfect. Okay. Thanks for that. Right. Moving on to people capability, health and safety quarterly report. And we've got Jill and Karen and Stephen. Sorry. Long Karen, and if you've got some comments and questions afterwards, perfect.
Morena, councillors. So you have in front of you the quarterly people and capability health and safety paper for your information. And this quarter we've provided a little bit more information on the future ready ways of working work stream that sits under the Tangata Raupukenga, which is our people strategy. And we've really just given you a little bit of information in there in terms of what that work stream involves. It's focused really on making sure that we've got the right people, the right skills when we need them to be able to deliver what you ask us to deliver for our communities. And it's really responding to an evolving workplace with things like digital transformation, changing direction from central government, all of the many things within our operating environment that are evolving. And this is our way to really keep on top of that and to really be a little bit more planned and considered in how we're responding to that. And so, yeah, I think both Steve and I are open to questions.
Stephen, did you have any comments to make?
No, I just happy to take it as read. If you've got any questions,
take it as read. Okay, open for questions. Councillor Scott, I'll go around the room. Thank you, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, my question's about lost time injuries, and I presume it's the person who fractured their rib, which then raises the question about preventability and, like, you know, is there something that we can do different in future?
It was a situation where he lost balance on a bank, and so any incident that happens, we do an investigation and see whether or not there is preventive measures that can be put in place. Due to the nature of the work that our staff do out in the field on uneven ground, it was just one of those situations where he lost his footing, and so we have looked at it. I don't think there was anything that we saw from the incident that had a recommendation to change the.
Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, I was really just wondering with the change of focus and emphasis for WorkSafe, is there any ramifications of that for us as a regional council?
For us, not really, in the sense that the latest announcements that came from WorkSafe was that they, were after organisations to be more focused on their critical risks. We've been engaged in that for a number of years. We started a project on that back in 2019 to focus on those. So really, the government kind of announcement is really catching up to what a lot of the industry and organisations have already been doing. The other focus that was announced yesterday was in terms of a focus on kind of education and a proactive way that WorkSafe will engage with organisations. That's been something that's been called for a long time from us and others, in terms of having WorkSafe be more proactive in giving advice rather than just being an enforcement arm. They were very much focused on enforcement, with discouraging engagement between industries and themselves. So that change of focus will actually be really beneficial to improving that engagement between them and.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really love this, the future ready ways of working and the adaptive job roles. Two questions. One is, are we, do all other councils do this, or are we kind of ahead of the game in this adaptive working?
That's a really great question. There's a real cross-section of approaches at the moment. So I think more and more organisations, including councils, are focused on skills and workforce strategies and planning. I think the adaptive ways of working is more seen in the private sector currently, I would say, than it is across government, or certainly local government. Interestingly, when we started this project, we connected in with the Public Service Commission, and they're also doing something similar to mobilise people around central governments more efficiently. And so we've been keeping in touch with them on the work that they're doing and learning from each other and what have you. So it is gaining momentum, but I don't know that you would see it across certainly some of the bigger councils, most likely, but not necessarily all councils.
Yeah. And in terms of employment contracts and the employment law around that, how do you get around a rigid employment contract and say, well, we might deploy you over here, and your job might be completely different? Yeah, how do you do that?
So we're doing it on an opt-in basis at the moment. So it's voluntary. So we've been piloting some adaptive jobs for a couple of years now as an organisation. And that was deliberate from a number of perspectives. One, to see how it worked, but also to socialise the concept within the organisation, so people can see it and see it's not so scary. And we're actually getting people already saying, can I do that, please? And what our vision is, I guess, is that we don't need everybody to work like that, but we want a percentage of people to work like that, so that we can adapt to ebbs and flows in workloads and move people to where our priorities are. So I think that's our approach.
Yeah. Awesome, love it. Thank you.
Any other questions to Karen or Stephen? Any other questions on the report? Happy to move. So there's a resolution on page 54. We receive the report. Amanda, seconded by Councillor Scott. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. It's carried. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Stephen. Moving on to page 61, which is a customer service and rates collection performance report. Have we got Jo online? Somebody? Oh, she's here in person. Perfect. Perfect. Welcome along, Jo. And good report to receive in terms of rates collection. You've been busy, or your team's been busy, I should say. Yeah. Anything you want to add to your report in terms of, it's taken as read, but anything you want to add to highlights?
Yeah, certainly. I just wanted to sort of draw everybody's attention to the fact that we've now further collected another percent. So we've now got just over 2% remaining for the end of the year. I just wanted to sort of talk about the reminders and just talking about the engagement with the community, those people that we're finding that are a little bit harder to win over in terms of trying to secure payment. And so I sort of drew into my report just talking about those that are less willing to pay and potentially some of the more judicial next steps that we may look to engage following the end of our third year. And so I just wanted to notify council that there is that intention that we'll look to pursue under the Rating Act further judicial proceedings, and that those things come at in a serious manner, but we want to be fair and equitable for payers. And then finally, I just wanted to just speak to the fact that we've now joined up with the customer services function, which means there's quite a nice synergy between the two teams, which enables us to be able to really take those next steps in terms of our community engagement. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Eadie, and then I'll come around the room. Councillor Eadie?
Chair, kia ora. Just with regards to on page 65, extended payment arrangement, and you stating there that rating years being marked by ratepayers having difficulty in meeting their financial obligations and that they're not coming forward. I'm wondering, what is your department's predictions given the financial situation nationally at the moment as to how that's going to trend? And if that's, if you're predicting that it's probably going to be either consistent or grow, what's our approach?
Yes, certainly, thank you. Through the chair, we're looking, and that's why I sort of explained about other mechanisms and other ways that we wanted to extend our payment by bringing on a customer portal. We're investigating and going through a discovery stage of that. We're wanting to look at other mechanisms because, we understand and appreciate that there is a constraint within our communities. And so for us, it's about just getting a conversation and dialogue. It's really important to just start the conversation first. Then we can look at initial engagement, look at initial proposals, and potentially look to expand with an opportunity when it best suits the customer, but with the expectation that they have to pay their rates. So it's about just really connecting with those people, and we're making a targeted campaign to really try and find the people that are less willing to pay and see if we can start those conversations.
Oh, I just had a quick question around the sovereign citizen movement. Is that a growing movement, or is it a flash in the pan? Is it a long established? I mean,
so it really has eventuated or become more of a high profile since COVID. And in my experience, it has expanded quite significantly, and we're certainly seeing a movement growing. It's not depleting, and there are those in the community that are strongly expressing their opinions, and it's fostering quite a bit of mistrust, and it's about how we can persuade and educate and inform. We certainly can't change the way people think, but we need to be able to engage in a way to protect their big asset, because I think for some people they're unaware of what the Rating Act can do to people's home ownership, and we want to protect that. We don't want to certainly take away their individual rights, but we want to inform them of the obligation.
That to me sounds like a very soft option.
Masterpiece for only 20.
You've got it yourselves if you're online, please.
A group of anarchists essentially, and we're saying that we're going to keep talking to them.
No, we're saying that we're going to actually pursue further action, but we are trying to continue the dialogue to inform them of what's going to happen. So no, we're moving into enforcement. But it's important to speak to people in a fair and equitable way to let them know what the next steps will look like, because we do not ultimately want them to lose their property. However, we have to start that route if that's the case.
Problem is, as you get longer accumulating arrears, the bigger the hurdle comes for them. They finally in reality.
And that we're fortunate in the position that we only have 3 years of accumulation as opposed to other councils which have significantly more. So we're trying to be more proactive by not spending that.
Councillor Crosby, did you?
Thanks, Joe. Just quickly, part of our rating structure is land valuation, which I'm assuming we're still getting that from the TLAs. How's that trucking along now? We're doing our own thing. Anything changed or still much the same?
So there are probably more frustrations in terms of the actual valuations community, in terms of the valuation service providers. There's constraints with that in terms of delay of information. A lot of councils are experiencing non-compliant audits for their revaluations, which then flows on through to us accordingly. So we have found in the last couple of years, through those constraints, that we have significant delays. And so some of our assessments, original assessments, have to be reassessed based on the further decisions or objections from revaluations when they finally do settle. They're crossing over rating years now. So we've got a higher degree of uncertainty, and it's certainly not through the local authorities, but through their contracted valuers. However, both the main valuers in New Zealand are experiencing the same problems.
So just quickly, Chair, that can create quite a significant equity issue or fairness and equity issue. People aren't valued on the same platform at the same time. Well, I know they're not valued at the same time, but it's benchmarked back to a certain point in time to try and be fair. But if you're having all these disruptions, that from a ratepayer's point of view,
Chair, it does. However, we like to be very accommodating, and we try to work with the affected ratepayers, and we certainly work with the local authorities to identify those that may be affected, so that we can provide advance notification where possible to sort of talk about their options.
Any further? Oh, Councillor Scott?
Yeah, I'm interested in, like, at some stage, we're going to be once again considering the rates. I'm interested in the cohort of, is it about 1,300 properties that I read, which is a significant number that would give statistically useful information. What are there any patterns in terms of the quantum of rates per property that seems to be higher than others? Is there any geographical, is there anything that shows a pattern where we should be aware of coming to our rate setting policies?
Certainly. So
you don't have to answer now if you don't have a further report.
Yes, certainly. I suppose what I can speak to is, on average, these properties are around $1,200 per property, sort of growing. However, some obviously have significantly more, some have less, and yes, there are pockets around the region that are sort of isolated to having higher incidences of non-payment, and so we actually do try and target those when we are doing our instalments, to provide extra media, different mediums such as Facebook or social media, to actually target those communities, so that we can try and reach those people in case that perhaps there's just not a medium that's been able to engage at that point. So we're trying to always actively try and engage and isolate and identify those particular communities.
Mr. Chair, I thought it would be useful to, at a future period, to have that sort of detail in front of us, and just to help with the things.
Councillor Shirley?
Yes, thank you. Last year, I recall, we extended the rates remission policy and included various classes of Maori-owned land, and particularly with regard to non-income generating land. And the comment was made at the time that once that land does become income generating, then it does become liable for rates. My question is, how do you monitor and measure that threshold? And because that would take quite a lot of activity, and we all know it's easy to generate income but not show it. So I'm just wondering, how robust is your system of evaluating that in terms of that rates remission category?
Certainly, through you, Chair. So we've actually not had any applications to this point that actually covers that. However, we have
within the remission policy, we created years, and we created a finite period of when we would have that remission to cover. And then we also expanded that to actually say that we would review on an annual basis. However, because we've not actually implemented it at this point, I can't answer how that's been progressed because we don't have an example at this moment. However, for us, it would be about, we would request financial records to support their remission application to see how they're progressing. And there's also the thing where people may be able to look at their books and be able to bring down their taxable income. So you have to be a bit more pragmatic and look at things from how their operating revenue has been pursuing to that point.
So if I heard you right, there's been no applications at all for that rates remission under those categories that we approved last year?
For that particular example.
Councillor Eating.
Just offer some insight into that, Councillor Shirley, around the reality that the majority of the land that we're talking about is a multiple shareholdership, and quite a lot of those lands don't have operating trustee structures, and that can be the challenge with regards to filling out applications for rates for remission and so forth. That it's quite a quagmire out there for a lot of whānau to manage.
Councillor McDonald.
The other thing, Mr. Chair, the other thing I was going to mention, that most of our records are coming from the TLAs. So I think another way we would pick that up is through the activity of the TLAs, because they have that closer relationship with the land day, not necessarily regional council. So I guess it's another area that you can tap into, see around that activity. And the reason I'm going to take it that there's no uptake under our regime is that they've already taken that step through the TLAs, which we've basically adopted moving forward with ours.
No further questions for Joe. Happy to move to amend the receive the rates performance report on page 61. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor McMillan. Any further discussion? I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Thank you, Joe. That's very good, and yeah, get back to work and keep your team busy by the sounds of it. Okay, moving on to climate change quarterly report. This is on page 73, and Nick Newman's here. And Nick, you would have heard Kat's presentation this morning on what we're doing here, and might like to reflect on her report as well in your summary. Okay, you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll do my usual précis of the report, and then happy to take questions and discussion or reflect on this morning as well. And so this is our quarterly report as usual, starting with the community-led climate adaptation projects. I won't go through them individually, but the report, you take that as read. Just draw your attention to a couple of new projects that have been funded with Ngāi Tuakarangi, Ngāti Hei. They arranged with Tauranga City Council, Tauranga City funding those projects and to us, but doing that through our mechanism. So it's always good to see. We continue to support Rotorua community through my team and the work of Pay Island. Just a reflection on the mangrove conversation from this morning. Hapu there, I guess they've got a different take on the mangroves than perhaps the broader community might do, in terms of they see that potentially as targeted mangroves may help the future protection of the island from storm surge in the estuary. So there's the other perspective, I guess, is starting to come through in the community, rather than just remove at all costs. So that would be an interesting little test case, I think. In terms of the tools, you'll be able to see from the photo, there's the Coast Nap Station, which is in at Waihi Beach Lifeguards now. It's great to have that established, and they're very excited to start using it. We are continuing to work across 19 different councils to establish a local emissions data platform, so interactive platform that councils can use rather than everybody paying every 3 years a consultant to produce a report for the region on emissions. So an interactive way of getting better access to data, but also saving money. In terms of the future, a couple of things just to draw your attention to here: the spatial planning aspect in terms of climate resilience and bring that into spatial planning. It's happened through the Eastern Bay Spatial Plan. It's been done quite successfully in that example. Just another hook to this morning in terms of that marine spatial planning and thinking about how we bring in that kind of climate, building that climate resilience into the marine spatial planning will be another. I think we already talked to Josie and she's excited about that opportunity with space. Just for Apodiki, all those threads are coming together in Apodiki. I've said there about there was a briefing for Apodiki elected members about the advisory, the river scheme review, the Waimeka Otara, Whakatai growth planning. There's a natural hazards assessment. There's community projects there with Te Whakatauia. All those things are coming together in Apodiki, which I think is great. They really appreciate that all of these threads are being brought to the elected notice. They're all working together. Here's the National Adaptation Framework. Just want to take out a minute just to update you with where things are at there. If you remember, National picked up Labour's Select Committee inquiry into adaptation, National Select Committee inquiry. The Minister's very intent on building a National Adaptation Framework, and this is really about clarifying who does what and cost sharing, with the idea that we need to minimise the long-term costs to the nation by getting in front of this and adapting. He wants to set in place a framework so we can do this systematically. He received advice or options from officials last Tuesday. He got his package of options, and we're expecting legislation to be introduced later this year. So that will give us a frame for a kind of systematic adaptation. From I guess a couple of us have been involved in some of those conversations with the ministry, and we think there will be like a main pathway which will identify high-risk existing communities and prioritise those for local adaptation plans. And there might be a pathway which is like our community-led, the more organic and bottom-up approaches. So we expect that to land later this year, which will give us a real window on the future and our future roles in this space. That'll be a big piece of work to think about what the implications are and how we do that going forward into the next LTP. In terms of other things, just to draw your attention to, now I put in a table in this report which I took out of Kat's report, presented to you this morning. I thought it was good just to reflect on in terms of what we do in terms of what she presented. I guess why I put that table is thinking about our swim lanes, what we've got control over. If you look at the bottom line, I think it's your page 79. It's the hazard that has the most impacts on those marine ecosystems. It's actually sedimentation associated with severe weather. So work that we do in terms of keeping soil on the land, that's critical to reducing the stress on those marine environments. The restoration of different habitats is that's the flip side of it, but that's just critical, that work we do in terms of sediment, especially where that ends up in those sensitive environments like harbours and estuaries. And I guess with a thing, kind of nod to the future, I think there's potentially two kind of pathways for us in the future. One around that, building that, that community resilience through adaptation planning under the National Adaptation Framework as being something that we've got expertise in, and also this resilience for our natural assets, like to climate change. So, like we think of it as the natural capital of the region that we rely on, right? So the coastal marine environment, our land and soils, our freshwater, our forests, they give us all the things we value. And if they are going to be, affected by climate change, then we can help with that by building the resilience of those systems. And it's not just for their own right, but we draw on those, like the coastal marine environment, Aquaculture, for example, provides wealth for our region. Increased ocean temperatures, acidification, that challenges the coastal marine environment, challenges aquaculture, challenges our income streams we can derive from aquaculture. So it's about thinking about how we can build the resilience of those systems. And some of those things that Josie talked about, Kat talked about, are in that bucket. But it's not just us, right? It's industry. So industry are researching heat tolerant mussels, for example, to respond to that challenge. We've got to play in that space. So yeah, as I say, the future could be thinking about how we can work with our natural systems and build up their resilience, work with our communities around their resilience, those at-risk communities. But yeah, very happy to take questions and discussion. Based on the report.
Nick, open for discussion. Councillor Crosby.
Thanks, Nick. With regard to the National Adaptation Framework, the former one, led by James Shaw, also looking at having a process with regard to managed retreat, which we've unfortunately had to go through. It's really messy because we had to deal with Local Government Act and the RMA and a range of other things. Is that, and I haven't had a chance to look at it, is that in the new adaptation framework to consider a fair and reasonable pathway for managed retreat?
I think it will be, but it'll be much less of a focus. So I think the previous government one was really focused on retreat as like a synonym for adaptation. This government sees that managed retreat is the very end of the line that you get to eventually, hopefully not. So it's more about setting up a situation so you don't have to get to that. But there will be, I think, there will have to be a process in there for a situation that managed retreat is needed, so it's not incredibly messy like Ngātatāa. So I think they're aware of that.
So Shirley.
Yes, thanks. The 5 community-led adaptation programs, what's our budget for those collectively?
So we've got $120,000 per year.
For each one, or?
No, in total.
And I was just looking at the objectives and sort of how do we measure and monitor those? Because we've got words like here, the plan will enable the Hapu to protect and maintain the integrity and resilience of the natural resources within their Hapu boundaries under a changing climate. I don't know what that actually means, and I don't know how you'd measure that.
So we've got criteria that they have to meet to get funded. So some of those things are that they have to be able to prove they're going to do work that's not already being done, and they're going to do that in a way that addresses local climate challenges. So and they provide value for money, and they represent the community as well. So it's actually about them being able to drill right down into their local community and take action at that scale. So some of the things they're going to do is be thinking about the changes in terms of wetlands, changes in terms of rising groundwater, and how they'll adapt to those things at Whakatapu.
On the Motua Pai Island, we've got a long-term planning and the protection of the island's integrity in the face of climate change.
So, I mean, that's just a summary for the paper. That one there is about the burials. And so it's thinking about the key challenge there for them, they're trying to figure out is how long can they keep burying people on the island if the island is going to have rising ground susceptible to inundation. So that's the kind of clash of the values with the changing environment and how that's managed. And there's a really tricky thing there for them to manage, because the leadership can see this and can see that it's probably finite, but the whānau have, they think that for them they get buried on the island into the future, no matter what. So it's about supporting that conversation and understanding about, how long they've actually got, so they can keep.
It's a different conversation. That's sort of a socialisation of it internally. I would have thought a 10-minute glance would very quickly make up your mind what you had to do.
I guess what they're doing though is they're drilling down into the local side. That's what the project is actually drilling down into how long have they got, what does it look like under different scenarios in terms of changes to the island. They can have those conversations, exactly right, about that social process. So.
Any further, councillor McMillan?
Thanks, Nick. Just going back to the National Adaptation Framework. Yeah, my understanding is it's sort of the leaning towards voluntary relocation, etc., rather than managed retreat, like, yeah, trying to get the settings right so that people proactively, rather than reactively do the right thing, sort of thing. But I don't know the full detail, but I suppose my question is, and this is maybe more for Namuta and strategy and policy thinking, but how does it talk to spatial planning? And so where do those two meet?
I'll tell you what I think and what I understand is that spatial planning is going to be much more focused on growth.
Yeah.
And possibly on areas not to grow because they're at risk.
Yeah.
Whereas this adaptation planning is going to be its own thing, which is a deep dive into here are the foremost at risk communities within a region, prioritised based on risk, and then actually deep diving into what are they going to do for a start over time. And think about it a bit like, remember that I presented to you that that metro line, you know, for Waihi Beach, thinking more about what happens over time. How do you adapt over time? What are we going to do for Happy Sands Beach? You know, is it going to be during restoration for the first 10 years, the first 10 years? Then we'll see what happens. Then maybe it'll be we need to actually accommodate some water somewhere. Then maybe, depends on what happens in 50 years' time, maybe there needs to be a retreat. So it's that kind of process, which is separate from here's the picture of the region and where's infrastructure going to go, where's it not going to go.
Okay, all right. I didn't realise that National Adaptation Framework was going into, because I thought that was a criticism of it, that it was lacking any kind of detail. It was kind of...
Well, we're speculating, right? So it's not out yet, but it'll set the frame for this work to happen systematically.
Yeah. And just my other question around the peat subsidence, and going back to the earlier Kat's presentation earlier, is that taken into account? So when you're looking at saltwater environments and the encroachment of saltwater on to wetland, salt marsh to wetland, and then you've got subsidence because of drainage of wetland peat. Is that all into the mapping? Because obviously that's a backflow situation when you've got land drop as well as sea level rise for the adaptation and restoration and resilience of all of those environments.
I understand your question. I think what will happen is that it's something I think we're just starting to understand that as that land shrinks, as that peat shrinks, as the land goes down, then that's another barrier to those wetlands being able to migrate.
Yeah.
Because it might actually be that it's actually too low. So the land is actually lower than sea level.
Yeah.
So eventually it could become open water. It won't become salt marsh. It won't become mangrove. It won't become seagrass.
Oh, it just becomes sea.
Low.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's another challenge we're facing.
So highly complex and
Yeah. And just wanted to say, love the way you framed up, you know, this resilience piece and adaptation and what we can do in terms of helping natural capital out, and that mindset of, we've got this tsunami of climate change coming at us. Where's bang for buck in terms of helping our natural capital out, which is actually then helping our resilience and survival. I totally call your framing of how you're thinking about that. So thank you.
Councillor Scott and Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, my question's about how well we work with TLA. So I'm noting the community-led adaptation. You obviously did working well with TC's, the Tauranga City Council. I'm thinking also of the last day or so, Mayor Luca was talking about what's happening in Matata, which I imagine we should be involved or would like to be involved in that part of the conversation. So are you happy that your relationships with the various local authorities are working well and making sure that we've got the appropriate inputs? And secondly, are there any issues coming down the line that we need to be thinking about in the medium term, the particular issues?
Yeah, okay, I think it's a great question. I just want to jump back to, I think, just before COVID, if that's all right, just to the history, because I think that helps. We had a session at Te Puke, at the Orchard. I was trying to think who might have been there from the councillors. It was elected members session, and it was briefing, an external briefing about climate change. And the question was about whether the councils wanted to work together to take forward some regional work. The consensus there amongst elected officials was, elected members was no, but staff start working together. So since then, with staff working group, an adaptation working group since 2019, I think. So we've been working together for a number of years. We get together 4 times a year with all the TLAs and people who are working in this space, and they helped input into our regional risk assessment, which Whakatane District are now doing their local risk assessment. So they've used the methodology and the learnings, and they're drilling down now into the Whakatane District. So they're doing some quite deep work. District. So I think the relationship's really good. I mean, it's variable across the region, of course, depending on the TLA. By and large, it's in terms of the medium term, going to be a real question about when we get into this, implementing this adaptation framework, who does what. And I don't get the feeling the central government's going to use the words local government, probably, rather than which part of local government. So it's going to leave us probably again in the who leads, who pays, who partners, who supports conversation. That might be down to a case-by-case basis, depends on TLA capability. If we've got a high-risk community that's been identified in each district, and prioritised for adaptation planning, then it's going to be how we fund that process collectively. Who's leading it? Who's providing technical support? Who's providing the upfront leadership?
So bearing that in mind, thinking about the new spatial plan under the new MA, right? So that's where it's all going to come together. So my concern is, and it sounds as if you've got a basic framework or well-formed framework of working together so that those spatial plans will be able to be created actually quite robustly. Is that where you're?
I might just be, if we're talking about spatial planning, then maybe we should bring in the
Oh, kia ora, councillors. As you've noted and as Nick has explained, there's a key interface here with spatial planning where all of these components come together. You know, certainly I'm just thinking about the discussions we've had about the Eastern Bay Spatial Plan and the collective work we're doing across our organisation for those areas, to work through those areas of particularly high risk. And I'm thinking about the discussions across our organisations with Opotiki District Council in particular. We've got a number of touch points there in terms of looking at how we support that community to become more resilient across all of our work programs. Spatial planning is a component of where these factors come together, but it's really not clear in terms of how these new pieces of legislation are going to interact with each other. Certainly, we have flagged the importance of the National Adaptation Framework and the interlinkage with the planning framework and the Environmental Act, spatial plan components. There is also the lens of civil defence emergency management, which comes into play here as well as our flood scheme work. So there are multiple components, and we are working internally to ensure that our approach is aligned. And as Nick said, we are looking to identify where across the region are those critical high priority areas which we need to focus on. So that work is being undertaken as well. And I know we had flagged a paper to come to the Civil Defence Emergency Management Joint Committee just to provide an update on that natural hazards component. So it's a work in progress, and there is no clarity yet in relation to what the new framework looks or how it fits together. But certainly we have staff involved at multiple levels, and I know, Nick, you're involved in the National Adaptation Framework input. We have staff, as you are aware, seconded to MFE at the moment to provide advice in relation to design, transition and natural hazards in particular. So we are looking to influence in the ways we can.
I suppose the important question for me is to be aware of any sticking points that we need to become involved with to make sure that as an organisation we're ready for when the new world arrives.
Absolutely. So the paper that we're planning to bring to the Civil Defence Emergency Management Joint Committee will also look to see which relevant committee of our council might be interested in that too. That will help highlight the work we're doing on natural hazards, where the gaps are across the region in terms of meeting our RPS natural hazard provisions, and once we have our internal work together, we'll look to work out how best to link that to the relevant committee and seek your direction on that.
And other TLOs.
Oh, absolutely. We're working with our partners on every step here, whether it's the adaptation work with Nick, whether it's with spatial planning. As I mentioned before, we've worked with each of the sub-regional spatial planning teams to get into the implementation plan and action around mapping, so we can understand what the lay of the land are, where the gaps are, and where those opportunities are. And of course, that natural hazards resilience lens is critically important when you're looking at spatial planning. Yep.
Thanks.
Those go, no-go areas.
Sorry, about the roadblocks. What are the roadblocks? At the moment, there's a lot of plate spinning, but I can see in the future there might be big things we need to resolve and to be able to push forward. So I think, do we keep asking ourselves the right questions?
Kia ora, Nick. Thank you for the great report. My question is on page 75, and really just page 75. But really just a thank you for the marae by those hapu that you've mentioned, and ones that we're aware of that have gone before, i.e. Ngāti Whakaue, and I think you've done some work with Ngāti Kuku. My question is, because I do have a mental picture of every coastal marae in the Mawao constituency, and the thing that I haven't seen is Ōtāwhiwhi at Bowen Town and Ōtamarako. Are they in the system somewhere with you?
Questions? Thank you, Nick. Can I concur with your observations about sediment? And as a frequent traveller to the East Cape, and I see the Motu, and I see the Raukupi in full flight, flood mode, and the sediment in those rivers, and the effect on the ocean, it takes about 3 or 4 days before the water clears, and that's the normal tidal stream. So anything we can do in the catchment of those headwaters, and I know the Raukumaras have significant funding from, is it Jobs for Nature for the, yeah. I think those are the big rivers that I worry about, because we don't have a flood protection scheme on those yet. But certainly sediment in the catchments is a big contributor to what Kat was talking about in her presentation and your work. So yep, that's the one for me. Anything we can do in the catchment sediment has to be good for rivers, estuaries, oceans, full stop. Thank you. There's a resolution that we received next report. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor McMillan. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Moving on to Maritime Operations Summer Initiative. Is John here? Perfect. While you're coming to the table, John, last time we talked, we asked you to use your superpowers to put a designation in place between Motiti Island and Estraland to stop those big ships doing shortcuts?
Good afternoon, everybody. Chair, the day after you told me that, it was put into place. Stakeholders informed, LIMS informed, it's gone out as a temporary notice to mariners, all in place.
In place?
In place.
Perfect.
We've even got an alarm system rigged up, so if anybody enters, I know.
So how do ships know? Is that LINS? How
Goes
does?
through LIMS, so as you know, you have electronic charts.
Yep.
And you have temporary notices to mariners which go out for temporary
Yep.
warnings or events.
Yep.
That's already gone out.
Yep.
I've also spoken to all the shipping agents and the port, and the shipping agents have disseminated information to the ships.
Right.
So nobody's gonna come in there. If they do, I will know. At 2 o'clock in the morning, sleeping in my bed.
We will know. And what are the repercussions if they do? What's the?
Well, that's the, we could just infringe them for $200, that's about maybe $100, which is really a very, very small amount for a shipping line to use. But it matters because it's not just about the financial aspect, it's reputation and all that. So they would do it because if they do it, they know that we are aware of it now,
So Tony said on the day, because it was navigation but safety violence, Tony said on the day you would earn the wrath of maritime.
It worked out really well, actually, because we got in touch with MNZ at that time.
Yep.
And the manager I spoke to was with the director at that time, and she was very complimentary of the way we did it. Further, I went for a Harbour Master conference. I met her, and she was very happy with the way BOPRC handled it.
Perfect.
It's all worked out so far.
Perfect. I love it. I love it when it comes together, when a plan comes together and it's implemented. I love it. Councillor Shuley.
Are there any other harbour master orders that you might like to vote on the basis of that successful one?
Well, so the thinking of MNZ is they don't like harbour masters to overstep their authority and boundaries. This was a very relevant concern and something which had been missed. I don't know how. So there was no opposition. However, if there's something which can be subject to, given that MNZ should be doing it, I would face issues. So it all depends on the issue and the way we handle it. I'm happy to say we have a good relationship with Maritime New Zealand. That can change if I try and become too clever, as they put it. So
tell them to get in touch with us.
John, if someone, if a ship now does go through that passage, are they still insured? Yeah, so there's no possible repercussions.
now the fact is that all this time it was just a recommendation in the Nautical Almanac. Now it is a law. So they're breaking a law, so we're pretty covered, I'd say.
But yeah, so we're not, and what I'm worried about is if an accident then does happen, so the shipping company would still be insured, so be salvaged and all the rest of
They
it.
have all those insurances in place. Every big ship has to have insurance in place.
You.
So I take it that your report has been read.
Yeah, it's taken as read.
So I've tried to make it a little more interesting since it's the end of the thing almost and everybody awake. So a few interesting stats which are kind of applicable to what we do. What we got from drowning, this talks about drowning. So when you fall overboard, it takes 1 minute to catch your breath. Something is missing. It must be
Rebooting the system.
while we wait, I can just carry on, I guess.
Yep.
So It's been a very successful summer, I'd say. We've had good weather. Yeah, there you go. I'll go back to that. So it takes 1 minute to catch your breath, 10 minutes to start to do something physical, swimming. And every minute you're there, it just keeps getting harder, you get weaker. And within 1 hour, you're unconscious. The more stats, this is again from Water Safety New Zealand, talks about every year 18 people drown. The relevant for us is that 94% of the craft-related ones were individuals not wearing life jackets. And that hasn't really improved, surprisingly. The other very concerning fact is people feel that when they're close to shore, they're safe and they do all the shortcuts. Lakes is a prime example, and that's not really true because the lakes can be very dangerous. You can drown in a bucket of water, so how far you are doesn't make a difference. That's complacency. It also has a financial impact. It costs $1 million approximately. And so what we are doing is doing our best to educate the public and ensuring compliance. So we stop that. And it's a battle because people don't want to listen. Some people just don't want to listen. And we're looking at the usual education. We're targeting hotspots, and I'll come back to that a little later. We've encouraged life jackets, and we started talking about using 2 forms of communication, which can save your life. So this summer, we had 467 breaches of bylaws. All the stats, I don't bother reading them out to you. I think you've seen this. The fact is that we've had many more patrols out this summer because the fact in the past we had a big challenge in Whakatane getting skippers and crew. This summer we're fortunate, we had 2 skippers and 2 crews, so we had patrols out much more. We also moved up to Potiki, which has been really good. Surprisingly, I thought we'd get a bullet, but we actually were well received. The community loved having seen us there. Our students did a beautiful job this time. They, as you can see, they did a lot of boat ramp education. This, by the way, is funded by Maritime New Zealand. In all, it's been a good summer. We've also had much fewer cancellations of shift because of bad weather. This is our comms. The comms is really good. We found there was much more on Facebook was really especially very successful. And we actually target issues we identify as being, for example, small craft. We have big ships. We kind of go towards more of that to educate them. This is our safer boating initiative, which was very successful this year. Thanks to our Maori strategy team, who also helped us with the funding, apart from Maritime New Zealand. We went from just doing a 3-day skipper course. We actually did a drowning education. So you got some pictures there. What's the region? So this is our result. We worked in Tauranga, Opotiki, Whakatane, and Rotorua. We had 31 candidates this time, and we have a waiting list already built up for next summer. So this is after they did their training, there was a quiz, and this is what came out. They all felt much more comfortable. They learned so much, and we're hoping this message will go back to the fund. Our only concern is next summer funding again from Maritime New Zealand, because as you all know, wells are being tightened. So I can't promise I can do the same thing next summer, but we will get something, I think. And then I've already started shopping around for more funding. It's doing really well. We've been very involved. Our maritime officer has been very active in maintaining the navigation aids. So they were put in by the construction company HEB. And far below standard, they used all kind of chains and weights, as you'll understand, Chair.
That was far.
All below standard.
Oh, our standard.
Just taking
Yeah.
tracks and putting them as weights, and the chains were not properly. So we're redoing the whole thing.
Oh, gosh.
I will say this, that it's not for free. Nothing for free nowadays. We are charging them.
Charging the harbour.
It's being charged to ODC, but the HEB is paying it because it's still under HEB, the construction company.
Oh, okay.
So we got $8,000 already, I think, for Dan's job there. And it's an ongoing process. We're gonna get all of those replaced with the proper material, so it'll last. It's a constant battle because even as I talk to you, the two outermost buoys which are outside at sea, they lost the tops because of very, very big waves. So that's ongoing kind of maintenance. And a new boat is doing it really well. We've also acquired survey equipment. And again, we are fortunate that Dan, a maritime officer, is a trained hydrographer. So we'll be doing surveys, proper surveys, professional surveys of Whakatane and Potiki. And again, because this is not our core responsibility, we'll be charging. Charges always at cost, much cheaper than employing an outside contractor. Picture will be coming soon. So we have our usual BAU with the weather being what it is. We get pulled out at all times, boats breaking moorings, assisting the agencies. I can't put that, of course, obviously there. I assist the police, the narcotics squad a lot, rescue, drug searches, customs. And we have an emerging problem to start addressing, already started addressing, is derelict boats. So if you go to Tepuda, and you'll probably hear with some other councils, there are quite a few boats building up there. There's this one gentleman who I know personally, already taken his boat and destroyed it. He bought about 5 boats more for $1 or $2 each. And he's invited all his friends to come and live on them. So they're all homeless. And fears they'll start a kind of a commune, which I'm not against, but I don't want it on the water because there are 2 issues here. One is when we have bad weather events like now, there's danger to them because they have no safety. I'll show you the boat, how it looks like. And then once it sinks, retrieving it is very expensive. And of course, there's damage to the environment. Those are 2 of the boats which are currently there. If you look at the side of the boat, it's got nothing there. It's been like this for a while. So last week, we went and issued wreck notices to 3 of them, which means we go through the process and after 14 days, we go and collect it and destroy it. Now this cost us about, for this kind of a boat, about $6,000 each. If it's a steel boat, it costs much more, $15,000, but it's still cheaper right at this stage rather than let it sink. So this is what my next target is, to get rid of all these boats, and I'm accused of making people homeless and a lot of others unpleasant things, but the fact is that this is danger to the persons themselves. And the other issue is that they are always engaged in nefarious activities. Customs has interest in them. The other council are upset because they go and have parties on the beach. You'll probably hear of some complaints very soon. And there's a place where they ride horses, so they've tied ropes across, so horses get tripped. These other issues start coming up. So ideally, these guys should not be allowed to live on boats. You can't maintain them. And that's my next push.
Councillor McDonald.
Can I ask a question? Okay, I understand that you've got a job to do here, but in doing what you have to do, kind of rendering these people homeless. Do we make contact with the authorities that look after people that are homeless, so that in their understanding that you're having to carry out this, rendering these people homeless, and it then give some leeway into homes being sought for these people, as opposed to just leaving them homeless with you having to destroy where they're currently living?
So councillor, yes, It's a good point. I look into it, but I can tell you now, what's the word, how do I put this? These gentlemen and some ladies refuse to leave the boats. So if you, like this gentleman I spoke about, we destroyed his boat already. He's gone and bought another one. So they insist on living on the boats. They believe they can live on the boats. They believe they have the ability to repair their boats, and that's not true. So we will go that path. I'll talk to Ruben on how we can approach with authority, but the fact is that these people will always, it's the same group who keep going back. Because it costs $1. He will sell this boat. If I tell him I want to take his boat away, he'll probably put it on Trade Me and somebody else will buy it for $1. So it's a kind of a vicious circle. We need to cut it off now.
So are you saying then when they repurchase and buy another boat, they're actually still back in the same situation where you're having to destroy the boat?
And we're the meat and the sandwich.
Yeah.
Councillor McMillan?
Oh, just sorry, still on that. So who owns the mooring? Are they on a mooring?
At anchor. They're at anchor. Once in a while,
they're just anchored.
There's no law against it. See, this is the problem. I don't have the powers to stop them from anchoring. We only have bylaw is that you can't stay in the same place for 14 days. You have got to move. So
they just move the anchor. Yeah. Okay.
So even that we're trying to change it, and we've implemented at the lakes, which is I'm also concerned about the lakes. We don't want it building up there.
Yeah.
So
this is just in Te Puna. This is a micro issue, or
it's all over the region, all over the country,
all over the region. So even on the moorings in Pilot Bay, those derelict boats, has you got the same challenge there, or is it just when they're not on moorings?
So when they're on the moorings, if the boat is like that, we can't be that. The same rule applies, but it's easier because they are on a mooring.
Yeah, so you can have a level of control.
These blokes are all over the show. Like they'll move from Te Puna, they'll move to Margaret Bay, they'll move somewhere else.
Yeah.
They even move up to Whitianga sometimes. And I'm, go away. They come back.
They come back. Yeah. Okay.
I do work with the police and the customs because some of them have some issues there. But this is my next project, if you like, to try and clean this up.
How many? Ballpark. How many?
Definitely about 7 or 8 at the moment.
Oh, okay.
But there may be more because it has to get to a stage where it looks like that before I can declare it as a wreck. It's floating and seaworthy. So there are 2 issues here. So if it's seaworthy or unseaworthy, I can ask them to take it out of the water. But then what happens to the boat?
So in your powers as harbour master, you can declare vessels wrecks and you can declare them to remove them from the water. You can. You don't need us to intervene again. No. Okay, that's good.
Can I ask
you go?
So if you have if you own a boat and it is seaworthy and it is seaworthy, you can actually live on the water.
Yes, you can. But you must conform with our RMA. Which is about the sewage aspect.
Yeah, it's the discharge.
So when you go out, and we do that too. Our teams go out and go involved and they go and look for toilets. And they may have it, but the point is, do they use them?
Yeah, no.
The kind of character lives on this boat doesn't care about the environment or
doing business on an outgoing tide usually.
Can I just check? So if I've got a boat that's deteriorated and I need to get rid of it, I can simply ensure that you declare it's unseaworthy and you'll take it away and destroy it for free.
Then we will come after you for the cost.
Okay, that's the important.
6,000.
We will do the whole process. And these gentlemen or ladies don't have any resources, so we're stuck. But I'll just say it's a nationwide issue. Auckland has 2 team members just devoted to this task.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Does that finish your report? That's it? Okay. Any further questions to John, our harbour master, on his report? Very comprehensive. Behind the scenes, we don't often see it, but we hear about it with drownings and the like. And I was interested, John, the coroner's ruled on that Kaikoura capsize. Those 5 people, when the whale hit the boat, it flipped it, and those 5 people had inflatable life jackets on, and they succumbed to petrol fumes in the hull, upturned hull. Had they been able to get out of life jackets and swim underneath and then come pop back up, they would have been all right. But that's, I mean, I hadn't thought of that in terms of petrol fumes, succumbing to petrol fumes before you even try and get out of the boat. That's really sad.
The learning from that is the way you wear your life jacket.
Yes.
The one which we have now, all I've converted them to press button, press the button, it releases.
Yeah.
You have another kind which has a buckle inside
Yeah.
the other. Those are terrible, you can't take them.
Terrible.
But if you have a press, you just press the button, release and you can swim.
Yeah.
If you've got the press, mine.
Yeah. No, those buckle ones are terrible. You try and get off. And when it's pitch black, you're wet, you can't. Any questions? Right.
Just around the, thank you, just around the Mortiti, obviously a couple of days after we were talking with you, I can't remember what meeting it was, there was that recreational.
No, it was a commercial charter boat.
Oh, was it commercial? Someone owns
Was
it.
recreational.
Pretty much everyone I know knows them. But
He ran aground.
yeah, so in terms of those charts, and obviously also the fact that it's a very protected area and they have fishing rods, etc., and loads of fish, that's a whole other story. But that with the update of that cut through, and I don't know exactly where their location was, but does it presumably it also applies to smaller vessels or
Purely for boats with, for ships.
yeah. So even if those people had looked at the charts, obviously if they looked at the charts, they would have seen that they were about to drive over some rocks. So they clearly weren't looking at charts, but that cut through thing doesn't apply to them. So as long as they steered away from the rocks, they were able to be there. Yeah, okay.
It's very hard to miss those rocks. You're wondering how they actually.
Yeah.
I think there was some other.
Sticky uppy things.
There was quite a lot of champagne going.
I think exactly. I was about to say that. There's some.
Skipper's responsible.
Come on.
Anyway, we'll keep going. Any further questions to John? Thank you. This resolution that we receive your report.
Happy to receive.
Thank you for that. And moved by Councillor Von Delson, seconded by Councillor Shirley. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Moving on to our final report under a separate cover, and this is Kirsty on our River Schemes Advisory Group. Taken as read. Belts and braces, and thank you for the opening of the Rangataiki spillway. What a fabulous structure on our rivers, ready to go.
Yeah, pretty impressive, all right. Yes, lucky last, so just taking report as read and opening for questions.
Councillor Scott.
I've got a question on gravel management. It's so the demand for using the gravel has reduced because NZTA has done their thing. What are we doing with the excess gravel?
So at the moment, it's remaining in the river. We are looking at supporting our contractors to work with NZTA to find if there is a possible solution or other markets. But unfortunately, if there's no demand for the gravel and it remains in the rivers, then if we do need to remove it for river management purposes.
To us.
Yeah.
And we have to stockpile it somewhere.
Could I add, NZTA recently changed the specifications, which makes it even harder in some of our river catchments. The specification virtually selects for quarry aggregate rather than river run.
Oh, okay.
You almost suspect it's a restricted trade practice sort of thing going on because the real question is, and I think the committee was to follow up, what's the veracity of that specification? Is it necessary or is it over specification?
So do we need to follow?
Well, I think the advisory group made that recommendation, as I recall, to do that with Mark Townsend was to do that.
Working with the TA roading at the rivers because they have an interest.
So that's underway. We don't need to do anything here today, Kirsty, to pursue that. That's all right. So, I mean, for us to get into the business of gravel extraction for the sake of gravel extraction and no supply, that's expensive. It is an expensive process. The preference is to find a contractor to do it, source to do it.
One of the suggestions that was made was to waive the management fee, the 90 cents per cube, so that's.
90 cents?
So to maybe encourage extraction.
Well, we're open to negotiation, aren't we?
It's operational.
I know, but you heard it here first.
Staff did bring that.
We're going to put it up, Mr. Ingle, to $3 weekly. And we had quite a bit of pushback from the contractors at the time, and we said, no, status quo.
Something we bring up in the next LTP, but for now it's been noted, and it's not a huge, the 90 cents is not, as you can imagine, a huge revenue generator. So it's not a deterrence to the supply either. Well, equally, yeah.
And I think that having NZTA to come back with some specs on what you need is probably a good place to start, Councillor Shirley, in terms of. Any questions to Kirsty on the river advisory scheme? Remember, these are 6 monthly, and the next one's held in September, something like that. So Macmillan, you had a question?
Just a clarification, so on page 98, the Anawhenua Dam reconsenting, that the second paragraph talks about members were reminded that given the regional council's dual role as consenting authority and river scheme manager, legal advice has clarified that rivers and drainage must remain independent, focusing solely on flood protection functions and assets without engaging in broader environmental matters. So, I mean, presumably that's like, what do they mean by that? Because obviously rivers and drainage do engage in, there is a crossover with flood protection and the environment with nature-based solutions, fish passage, all of that sort of stuff. So what do they mean there?
So that's a very good question. It was more from a previous situation where we were being asked to do stuff that was outside of our scope as flood managers.
Like what?
So.
Sorry, before my time.
If the lieutenant was here, she would say, Councillor, it is my job as the resource consents manager to assess the environmental effects of a proposed activity, whether it be a dam or a hydro dam, whatever. It's not for rivers and drainage to also have a view on that. So what we need to do is stick to our swim lane as the manager of the river scheme and the assets that that river scheme owns. And the other complication here is we've got perhaps some interests of a farming nature that wanted the regional council to kind of be in a bit of an advocate for them. So again, we wanted to say, no, we just stick to our knitting, the stuff we know, the stuff we have a responsibility to deliver. And so our submissions into that process will stick to that swim lane rather than stretching outside of it. And this has been a matter of some debate, so.
Yeah, so it's more about the environmental impacts that needs to be assessed by, environmental scientists, and it's so in terms of consenting, whereas the use of nature in terms of your flood mitigation and flood protection is just a physical thing that you can do rather than, so I get what I get it, yeah, so it's about
make submissions potentially opposing parts of the applicant's right to dam water discharge and all the other things they do, if those things affect our river scheme and its function and its assets. but not for other things that might happen upstream or downstream.
Thank you.
Councillor Shirley?
Yeah, I get regular phone calls from Galatea farmers over this issue, and I think it'd be fair to say there's some diversity in the community up there in terms of opinions, and little groups, factions who don't perhaps communicate as well as they might in a united way, which hasn't helped. But there is a feeling that information like low flow data, which the regional council owns, they would like that being available. They feel that in some of the previous hearings that the applicants totally outgunned us with their lawyers at the hearing, and that we didn't have enough information to rebuff some of the claims that the energy companies had made in their application. So what the community message I'm getting is that they're anxious that the regional council, those data sets that we do control and own, that we actually have that assembled and involve the community so that they know what that baseline data is, things like weed growth in the dams and all that sort of stuff, which is a problem. So, and it seems that there have been, I understand, meetings with some community groups, and they haven't necessarily shared it with other groups up there and explained some of the tensions between them.
I think, thank you, councillor. I think the alleged failing was with the Matahina Dam consent process, because this particular dam's never been consented. I don't think, or there's never been a hearing. I think it was consented before the RMA came in. So this will be the first time this has been looked at. But certainly if there's information requests, make sure that anybody has public access to our information.
No further questions. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Chris. Move that we receive the river scheme 25, or put that no, somebody might like to move. Thank you, Councillor Crosby, seconded by Councillor McMillan. I'll put that resolution. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. That concludes our meeting. Ruben. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chris. And those online, your questions, your comments, and I'll declare the monitoring.